What if I told you that a part of your life never happened? Not because you forgot it, not because your memory failed, but because the universe itself chose not to create it. There is a very small, very quiet possibility that between the seconds you remember, there are missing instants that did not simply vanish. They were never born. A laugh that never reached your throat, a blink that never touched your eyelids, a heartbeat that should have echoed in your chest but was silently skipped over, as if time blinked instead of you. You feel your life as a continuous river. But what if it is closer to a series of islands, scattered across an invisible sea of moments that never were? You are listening to Whispers of the Universe. If you are kind enough to leave a like, to share this with someone who also wonders at night, and to subscribe so you do not drift away from this quiet place. That gentle support keeps these whispers alive a little longer in the dark. Now, let us sink into the question. Imagine your life as a film. Every second is a strip of tiny images, each one slightly different from the last. You never see the individual frames. They flicker so fast that your brain merges them into a smooth motion. The illusion of continuity does not come from the frames themselves, but from the way they hide the gaps between them. Now change just one thing in that image. Imagine that the projector is not human, not mechanical, but cosmic. Imagine that the universe is the one choosing which frames are allowed to appear. And imagine that sometimes, quietly, it decides to skip one. A smile that would have changed your mind. A word that would have left your mouth and altered your whole day. A single instant in which you might have turned left instead of right. The frame is planned, possible, and almost real. And then time steps over it, like a foot avoiding a crack in the pavement. That version of reality never arrives. It never enters memory. It never becomes something you can lose. It simply does not exist. This idea sounds like poetry, but the first clues do not come from poets. They come from clocks. Over the past decades, scientists have built devices so precise that they can measure the difference in the flow of time between your head and your feet. Atomic clocks that use the vibrations of atoms as their heartbeat can detect changes in time when they are moved just a few centimeters higher in a gravitational field. Optical lattice clocks can be so stable that they would gain or lose less than a second over the entire age of the universe. When time is observed with such intensity, it does not behave like a smooth, perfect line. It trembles, it jitters, it behaves as if it is made of tiny steps, not an unbroken path. If you look at the numbers closely enough, you see irregularities that are not easy to blame on human error or faulty machines. A tick that comes slightly earlier than expected, another that arrives just a little late. At scales smaller than any human experience, time begins to look like something that updates rather than flows. This is where the hypothesis of microscopic time gaps quietly appears. Perhaps these irregularities are not just noise. Perhaps they are not merely the random imperfections of instruments. Perhaps they are gentle signs that reality is not continuous at its deepest level. Maybe time advances in micro jumps. Between those jumps, nothing happens. No particle moves, no field fluctuates, no consciousness experiences, not even you. If that is true, then your life is not a smooth story written across a continuous line. It is a string of approved instants, each one chosen by the universe to exist, with small, invisible deserts of non-being in between. You have never noticed them, not because you are inattentive, but because there is no you inside those deserts to notice anything at all. Yet something resists this idea. You feel continuous. You remember growing, changing, walking through years as if they were written in one long sentence. Even your pain feels connected, stretched across time like a single thread. Surely, if large parts of your story were missing, you would feel the holes. You would sense the cuts, the skips, the strange jumps between one instant and the next. But your own brain quietly shows you that you are not as continuous as you believe. Neuroscience has discovered that you do not perceive the world in a constant stream. Your mind does not process every photon, every sound, every detail in real time. Instead, it gathers small packets of information, then stitches them together into a narrative. There are windows of awareness and thin, invisible curtains in between. While one part of your mind is updating, another part is smoothing over the transition so that you do not feel the gap. Experiments have revealed what researchers call the attentional blink. When two visual events occur very close together in time, your brain can fail to register the second one, as if it has blinked internally. The second event happens in front of your eyes, but it never enters conscious awareness. It is not that you forget it, it is that your conscious self never meets it. Already, there are missing pieces inside your own perception. Your mind does not panic at this. It does not scream that reality is broken. Instead, it calmly fills in the blanks, ensuring that your sense of self feels smooth. Now place that next to the behavior of time itself. If your brain already works in snapshots, and time at the smallest scales may also operate in discrete updates, then a quiet possibility appears. What you call reality might be the synchronized outcome of two separate selection processes. One in your nervous system, one in the architecture of space-time. Both of them may be discarding more than they keep. The illusion of continuity would then be the most delicate agreement between the universe and the mind. The universe chooses which instance will exist. The brain chooses how to sew them together into something that feels like a life. And in the shadows of that agreement lie the moments that never were. Think about your memories for a moment. There are days that return with sharp clarity. The exact angle of light on a certain afternoon, the sound of a particular voice, the texture of a chair beneath your fingers. Then there are days that seem to compress into a single vague impression. Weeks blur into each other. Years collapse into a handful of images. You call it forgetfulness. You call it aging. You call it lack of attention. But what if some of that emptiness is not inside your memory, but outside it? What if there were instants that no memory could ever hold, because the universe made a quiet choice never to compute them at all? The way a careful editor cuts frames from a film, not because they are wrong, but because they are unnecessary. The story still works without them. In fact, it becomes simpler, easier to carry, lighter. There is a field of thought in physics and information theory that suggests the universe behaves as if it were conserving computational cost. Every change in the state of reality carries an energy price. Every bit of information has a cost to represent, to move, to maintain. If time is the stage on which change occurs, then one way the universe might reduce its cost is by not rendering every possible instant. It might choose only those instants that matter for the evolution of the system. Anything in between is not just ignored, it is never created. In that kind of universe, you are not continuously moving through time. Instead, you are being placed, moment by moment, into successive frames that already satisfy the rules of physics and the logic of causality. Every instant is a solved equation. Every instant is a decision. Between those instants lies nothing. No slow darkness, no hidden count, just absence. You do not fall through the gaps because there is no you to fall. You appear directly in the next allowed frame, already carrying the illusion that you got there by traveling. If this is true, then the question becomes uncomfortable and intimate. How much of who you believe you are depends on the moments that actually exist. Perhaps your most important memories are not simply events that happened, but events that survived the universe's selection. The hug that made you cry, the accident that changed your path, the coincidence that felt too sharp to be random. These might be frames the universe refused to skip, but around them, like a sea around scattered islands, there may be countless micro-instants that never reached existence at all. Times when a word could have been spoken and was not. Times when your attention could have shifted and did not. Times when whole branches of possibility were never grown because the underlying fabric of time did not update in that direction. You feel as if you are walking on a bridge of solid matter, but in another sense, you are tiptoeing across an arrangement of chosen planks with nothingness between them. There is another layer of tension here. If time can skip, if reality can leave out certain instants, then what does that mean for responsibility, for choice, for free will? Did you choose the words you said yesterday, or were you delivered directly into the moment where those words existed, with no awareness of the frames where you might have stayed silent? This is not a way to escape responsibility, but it is a way to feel the strangeness of being. You are both the character living the story and the pattern being rendered in selected frames. And still, you might ask, if there are gaps in time, if there are missing moments in my life, why have I never sensed even a hint of emptiness? Perhaps you have. Perhaps you have felt a sudden lurch in your awareness when a second feels shorter than it should. Perhaps you have walked into a room and felt as if something happened just before you arrived, but it did not. Perhaps you have experienced that soft glitch where you reach for an object, and for the smallest instant, you are surprised that your hand is already there. These sensations are easy to dismiss. The brain is noisy. Perception is messy. But there is a quiet possibility that some of those tiny glitches are not flaws in your mind, but echoes of a deeper structure where time itself is not fully attached. You live at a scale that does not allow you to see the raw edges. You do not hear the microscopic clicks. You glide over them, like a skater over a frozen lake, unaware of the shapes hidden in the ice. The idea that some of your life never existed is not meant to frighten you, but to soften the edges of your certainty. It suggests that you are not trapped in a rigid block of time. You are part of a process that selects, that creates, that discards, that chooses again. Perhaps the most tender part of this hypothesis is this: if the universe skips certain moments, it also chooses to keep others. Every instant you remember, every breath you feel right now, is a frame that reality allowed to be written. Out of all the things that might never have happened, this one is happening. You, listening to this, you, lying in the dim light of a room that will also one day become a blur. You, floating on a thread of allowed time, held up by gaps you will never see. And somewhere, far beneath the calm surface of your seconds, there are instruments still ticking, still measuring, still trying to pin down the shape of time. As they become more precise, they continue to find irregularities that do not want to be smoothed away. Little jumps, little pauses, little hints that, when you look closely enough, the river of time begins to look less like water and more like a chain. What happens if we follow those hints? What happens when we listen, not to the seconds our clocks display, but to the tiny stutters hidden inside each one? In the distance, beyond your room, beyond your city, beyond the curve of the earth, there are clocks watching time flicker at scales you will never touch. They are listening to the trembling of atoms, to the smallest vibrations that can define a moment. And when they do, sometimes time looks as if it is not flowing at all. It looks as if it is blinking. The question waiting in that blink will lead us deeper. What do those clocks really see when they stare into the smallest units of now? And why does reality begin to look incomplete even before you enter it? Between the rhythm of your breaths and the dim flicker of the seconds around you, there is a quiet truth forming. If moments can be missing, then something must be detecting the absence. Something must be trying to hold time still long enough to see whether it arrives smoothly or stumbles. That something is a clock. Not the one on your wrist, not the one glowing on your phone, but a device built to measure time with a level of precision that borders on obsession. These clocks do not track hours or minutes. They track vibration. They listen to the trembling of atoms, tiny oscillations repeating billions of times per second. They are so sensitive that if time itself hesitates, even for a sliver far smaller than thought can reach, they feel it. And sometimes, they feel something they cannot explain. The strange story begins with a subtle disagreement. Two clocks, identical in construction, placed inches apart, report slightly different versions of the same moment. Not enough to disrupt your day, not enough to disturb a satellite, but enough to make physicists stop breathing for a beat. A jump, a micro delay, a shift in a tick that was not supposed to shift. At first, the explanation is simple: noise, temperature, mechanical imperfections. But the deeper the investigation goes, the less satisfying those excuses become. The machines are too stable. The environment is too controlled. The data repeats itself with a patience that randomness never has. It is as if time itself is not delivering its updates on schedule. Imagine one of these clocks in a perfectly silent room, isolated from every interference the human mind can conceive. It watches an atom vibrate, again and again, in an endless dance so regular that it becomes the heartbeat of the universe. And then something happens, something so small that it barely earns the name. The beat arrives late, by an amount no chaos should be able to repeat. Then, another time, the beat arrives early. Not enough to be alarming, but enough to be suspicious. The human mind has difficulty imagining scales this small. The difference between two ticks of this clock is like the difference between two waves in an ocean the size of the observable universe. Yet even at that unimaginable scale, there are inconsistencies like tiny ripples in what should be perfectly still water. If time were a flawless line, these ripples would not exist. But perhaps time is not flawless. Perhaps it is not even a line. When researchers analyze these anomalies, what they find does not look like error. It looks like structure. A pattern too faint to claim, but too persistent to ignore, something hinting that time is composed of pieces. Pieces that may not always connect cleanly. A strange idea begins to form. Maybe the clock is not malfunctioning. Maybe it is telling the truth. Maybe time is the thing that refuses to cooperate. Imagine this clock as an observer at the very edge of existence, watching reality update in frames. It cannot see the frame that did not happen, but it can feel the absence where that frame should have been. It records the transition into the next allowed moment as a tiny acceleration or a tiny delay, because the universe took one more or one fewer invisible steps to get there. You experience the transition as smooth, because your mind paints over the gaps. The clock does not. The clock reports the whole exactly as it is, a tiny silence in the machinery of reality. Now, imagine thousands of these clocks scattered across laboratories around the world, listening, waiting, measuring. Some report the same strange tremors. Others remain quiet. Still, others produce anomalies only at certain hours, or in certain gravitational conditions, or at certain temperatures. It is as if time is uneven, as if it passes differently in places so close together you could touch them both with outstretched hands. The first time this was observed, the scientific community approached it with caution. It felt like discovering a small crack in the surface of something everyone believed to be perfectly smooth. Time was supposed to be reliable. Time was supposed to be the foundation. If time itself wavered, then everything built upon it, motion, causality, even identity, would become negotiable. But the data kept returning. Clocks disagreed not in sweeping dramatic ways, but in whispers. Enough to unsettle belief. Enough to whisper that perhaps nature is not continuous, not perfectly stitched, not flawlessly woven. Enough to suggest that time may not be a river after all, but a thread with knots. There is a moment, reading the raw data, when a scientist must confront an unsettling thought. What if the universe is more discrete than smooth? What if reality changes not continuously, but frame by frame, each tick a renegotiation of existence? Consider how a camera records motion. At high speed, you can capture a bullet flying, but between each frame the bullet is not recorded. It jumps from one position to the next. A clock observing the universe at the deepest level might be seeing something similar. Time jumping from one allowed state to another without resolving the path between them. For a human being, the jump is invisible, because consciousness is not updated at a higher rate. Your awareness awakens only in the frames that exist. You never awaken in the frames that do not. The clock, however, watches the transition. It sees the gaps in the sequence the way a musician might hear a missing note in a melody. The song still plays, but something is off. Something is unaccounted for. There is a philosophical elegance here. If time is made of discrete pieces, then reality is not a painting. It is a mosaic. a mosaic built one tile at a time, each tile a moment that exists only because the universe deliberately allowed it. Between those tiles is empty grout spaces, where nothing was placed, nothing was formed. What you call your life is built on selected tiles. The rest of the potential pattern was left blank. And perhaps the strangest part is this: the more precisely we measure time, the less time agrees with itself. The higher the resolution, the more clearly the seams appear. Just as high-speed cameras reveal the flicker of a hummingbird's wings, ultra-stable clocks reveal the flicker in reality's heartbeat. Now picture this. A scientist lowers one of these clocks by just an inch. A single inch. The clock begins to tick differently because gravity curves the fabric of time. An inch of height changes its version of reality. If time can change across an inch, what might it do across a micron? Across the Planck length? Across the unknowable gaps where missing frames might hide? Suddenly, the idea that time skips begins to feel less like speculation and more like a quiet consequence of everything we already know. Time is not uniform. It is not absolute. It bends, slows, accelerates, swells, fractures. At the edges of measurement, it behaves like something granulated, something assembled, something that could, under certain conditions, omit a moment. And here is where the drift truly begins. If clocks can detect the unevenness of time, and if the brain can hide that unevenness from awareness, then your experience of life is built atop two imperfect storytellers. Both are smoothing something. Both are discarding something. Both are participating in a fiction so gentle you never notice its softness. Perhaps the most haunting idea is this: a clock may be able to detect a gap, but it will never detect the moment that was supposed to fill it. Instruments can measure only what exists, not what never did. You, too, can recall only what happened, not what was meant to happen. And so, the question stretches further, reaching into a place even the clocks cannot follow. If time leaves out a frame, what becomes of the possibility inside it? Does it evaporate? Does it collapse into silence? Or does it wander the edges of reality, a ghost of a moment unchosen? Across the surface of these questions, something else begins to form, something that does not contradict the data but expands it. A thought that the missing instants might not be random flaws, but deliberate optimizations. That the universe is not skipping, but choosing. A clock cannot choose. A human cannot choose what to remember. But something larger may be choosing the structure of time itself. If this is true, then the clock is not malfunctioning. It is witnessing a negotiation between the universe and existence. And as we drift deeper into that negotiation, we are led to a quieter, stranger puzzle. What would happen if the gaps in time began to align, not at the scale of atoms, but at the scale of minds? Somewhere ahead of us, that question waits. Not here, not in this moment, but in the next frame the universe decides to allow. If the clocks can feel the tremble in time, you might expect the human mind to sense it as well. Yet you drift through life without noticing a single fracture. The seconds arrive with perfect softness. The world seems unbroken, seamless, continuous. Even your own awareness feels like a single, uninterrupted flame. But a deeper look reveals that this, too, is an illusion. Your brain is not a recorder. It is not a camera capturing every instant. It is a sculptor, carving the world out of absence. Every moment you experience is assembled from fragments. Between those fragments lie brief voids, tiny pockets where consciousness goes silent. You do not feel these pauses because your mind refuses to leave them empty. It stretches the last known instant across the gap, smoothing it like a hand brushing sand over a footprint. Within the smoothness lies the secret. You are experiencing less of the world than you think you are, and perhaps less of yourself. Consider what happens when two events happen very close together. Researchers call it the attentional blink. Your eyes see the second event. Your nervous system receives the signals, but your awareness does not light up. It misses the moment entirely, as though it slipped through a crack too narrow to step across. The moment occurred in front of you, but not to you. Now imagine this not as a flaw, but as a design, a way for your mind to cope with the amount of information it cannot possibly hold. a way to choose which frames become you and which dissolve before they ever reach identity. Between each conscious instant, there is a silent interval where the lights go out. Your awareness does not travel through the darkness. Your awareness reappears when the next frame arrives. It feels continuous only because the gaps are invisible. And here, the parallel becomes impossible to ignore. Your mind behaves exactly like the clocks that detect the trembling of time. Only your mind hides the tremble, while the clocks reveal it. Imagine looking at yourself from the outside. You sit in a chair, you breathe, you listen. But inside your skull, awareness is flickering, glowing, dimming, reappearing faster than you will ever notice. You experience your thoughts as flowing, but they arrive in discrete pulses, each one built upon the last. You live only in the pulses. You never live in the space between them. Now imagine something more unsettling. What if those interior gaps align with the exterior gaps in time itself? What if consciousness is not merely skipping moments on its own, but skipping the same moments the universe omits? Imagine two editors working on the same film. One controls the camera, one controls the viewer. Both decide, for different reasons, which frames deserve to be kept. If time discards an instant, your mind never receives it. If your mind discards an instant, time continues, but you do not. The boundary between these two kinds of absence begins to blur. This is where déjà vu enters like a quiet ghost, a sensation that should not exist, because you are certain, absolutely certain, that you have lived a moment before, even when logic tells you it is impossible. A staircase in a building you have never entered, a conversation you have never had, a gesture from a stranger that feels as familiar as your own reflection. For a breath, the present feels like a rerun. Some explain it as misfiring neurons, others as overlapping memory pathways. But there is a gentler, stranger possibility. Déjà vu could be the echo of a frame that never made it into your conscious timeline, a frame the mind discarded or the universe never created, leaving only the faintest imprint of its outline, an absence shaped like a memory. If your mind and the universe both select which instance to allow, then déjà vu might be the tremolo between two versions of the same moment. One that existed, one that almost existed, a near miss, a ghost of an unchosen now, a whisper from a version of reality that flickered briefly before being erased. It would explain why déjà vu feels both true and empty, both immediate and unreachable, both like memory and like loss. There is a tenderness in this idea. Not everything you feel must be fully explained. Some sensations may be the residue of moments that failed to become real. Now imagine how identity forms under these conditions. You think you are built from every second you have lived. But what if you are built only from the seconds that survived selection? What if your personality is shaped as much by the missing moments as by the present ones? What if the gaps define the edges of who you are? The moments when you could have spoken but did not. The moments when you almost understood something and then lost it. The moments when a choice flickered and disappeared before you even knew it was there. This is not a flaw. This is structure. This is the architecture of consciousness, living atop the architecture of time. Your mind is designed to ignore its own blind spots, just as reality may be designed to hide its missing frames. Perhaps this is why you never feel the discontinuities, because you are not meant to. Continuity is not truth. Continuity is comfort. But there is one more twist waiting at the edge of this thought. If awareness does not cross the gaps, and if reality does not fill them, then consciousness is not the experience of existence flowing. Consciousness is the awakening inside each permitted instant. You do not move through time. You appear in time. And as you settle into that thought, the next question rises like the dim edge of dawn. If both the mind and the universe skip frames, what happens when the skipped frames begin to overlap? Not just in perception, but in physics, there is a place where that overlap becomes visible. A place where clocks and neurons and space-time all begin to stumble in the same way. And to reach it, we have to look upward, toward the largest structure that still remembers the earliest tremble of time. The sky itself is holding something the brain cannot hide and the clocks cannot deny. The evidence waits in the background of the cosmos, and it will not stay silent in the next frame. The deeper you drift into the nature of time, the more a strange symmetry appears. Your mind flickers, clocks tremble, awareness comes and goes in pulses. But there is another actor in this story, one that behaves with even greater strangeness. Something so small that it should obey the universe perfectly, yet it refuses. A single quantum particle. If time were truly continuous, then a particle would glide through its states with the elegance of a violin note, smooth, predictable, flowing. But that is not what happens. Nature, when examined closely enough, does not glide. It leaps. There is an experiment that reveals this with unsettling clarity. Scientists place an atom under a watch so careful it observes the atom's internal energy as if listening to its heartbeat. And then, the impossible happens. The atom does not transition gradually from one energy level to another. It jumps, instantly, silently, without passing through any intermediate state. One moment, the atom is here. The next moment, it is elsewhere. The path between those states simply does not exist. Not as a blur, not as a hidden detail, not even as something too fast to observe. It is missing. Physics has a name for this, a quantum jump. It is a foundational truth of the microscopic world, one that does not fit comfortably with our sense of time. These jumps were once invisible to human measurement, but recent experiments have watched them unfold with precision, so sharp it nearly feels intrusive. And what they reveal is unsettling. A particle can move without moving at all. It can change state without traveling through the process of change. It can skip the frame where its motion should have been. Imagine two photographs of a bird. In the first, the bird is perched. In the next, it takes flight. In a normal world, the wing rising, the muscles tightening, the feathers shifting, all would be captured in the intermediate frames. But here, those frames are not blurred. They are gone. Nature simply chooses not to render them. This is the first hint that missing frames are not only possible, they are embedded in the laws of reality, not as errors, as structure. A quantum jump is the universe making a decision. At the human scale, you rarely see this kind of abruptness. You see a sunrise, not an instant of darkness turning into light. You see a glass tipping slowly from a hand, not appearing shattered on the floor. But at the scale of atoms, the universe does not bother with transitions. It creates states. It skips everything in between. Now imagine the implications. If the smallest pieces of matter do not experience their existence continuously, then why would time itself be obligated to flow without breaks? If the building blocks of reality move in jumps, then the fabric of time might do the same. Perhaps time is not the stage, but the participant. There is a moment in the quantum jump experiment, just before the leap occurs, when the atom hesitates. The instruments detect a kind of tremor, a faint signature that the atom is preparing to disappear from one state and reappear in another. It is as if the atom is listening for permission, a soft, cosmic whisper that says, "Now." And then the jump happens. Instant, absolute, without trace. You never experience transitions like this in your awareness because consciousness only exists inside the frames where you appear. The jump of your thoughts, your emotions, your identity feels continuous only because the skips are too small for the mind to illuminate. But the particle reveals the truth that has been hiding in plain sight. Reality does not require continuity to be real. A moment does not need a path to arrive. A state does not need a reason to be. Everything can change without passing through the act of changing. Now consider something even stranger. What if quantum jumps are not the exception, but the rule at every level of time we have not yet learned to measure? A particle jumps from one state to another. A clock jumps from one tick to the next. Your awareness jumps from one frame of the self to the next. Layers upon layers of skipped intervals, all hidden beneath the illusion of flow. This is why the missing moments matter. This is why the gaps are not simply voids. They are the dark spaces where transition is never written, because the universe refuses to waste effort simulating what does not need to exist. Every jump is a choice. Every absence is an efficiency. Every leap is a moment that bypasses becoming. Quantum experiments reveal one more unsettling truth. When the atom is watched carefully enough, Its jump can be predicted, not its outcome. But the moment right before it occurs, the universe gives off a tiny signal, a premonition of the missing frame. Just before the leap, the atom behaves as if part of its future is already pulling at it. Just before the jump, it leans toward the state that does not yet exist. It anticipates the moment that reality has not rendered. You might wonder, if a particle can sense a moment before it appears, then what prevents you from sensing the missing moments in your life? Perhaps nothing prevents you. Perhaps you already do. A shiver before you make a decision. A sudden silence before you speak. A breath that feels borrowed from another version of the moment. Maybe these sensations are not emotion, but physics. Not intuition, but the residue of a jump. And if the universe is full of jumps, then time itself may be a long sequence of transitions that never happened. A mosaic of complete instants separated by undone ones. You live in the instants. You pass over the undone ones like a shadow that never touches the ground. The deeper this idea sinks, the more the edges of continuity soften. You begin to feel how fragile a moment truly is, how unlikely, how selected, and that thought leads to the threshold of a larger mystery. Because if reality can skip frames at the smallest scale, then the universe might skip frames at the largest scale as well. The sky is holding a whisper the atoms have already confessed. A missing shape in the background of the cosmos, and it waits for you in the next drift of time. If quantum particles can leap without traveling, and if time itself trembles between one instant and the next, then a question begins to take shape, quiet at first, then impossible to silence. Why would the universe design itself this way? Why choose jumps instead of flows? Why allow moments to appear fully formed while skipping the ones that should have connected them? The answer does not begin in the stars. It begins in the nature of information. Scientists have long suspected that the universe behaves as if it is conserving something more subtle than energy. Something woven into every interaction, every atom, every bit of reality that manages to exist. This hidden currency is information, what can be known, what can be measured, what can be stored. And information is never free. Every event, every state, every moment requires the universe to encode, maintain, and update the data that describes it, not metaphorically, but physically. Even erasing a single bit of information, just deleting it produces heat. The universe pays for every calculation it performs. If existence has a cost, then continuity has an enormous one. A reality that simulates every microsecond of every particle's motion, every transition between every state, every possible path that a moment could have taken. This would require an impossible expenditure of information. So the universe may do what every efficient system does. It eliminates what it does not need. It avoids the frames that do not matter. It rejects transitions that add no value. It renders only the moments that support the next necessary step in the unfolding of reality. A universe conserving information would not waste effort on the in-between. Instead, it would build time the way an artist builds a sculpture, by removing everything except the essential. Imagine a painter creating a landscape. She does not paint every grain of sand, every trembling leaf, every particle of fog. She paints the suggestion of truth, the strokes that define the shape of the world, the outline that lets your mind fill in the rest. Her canvas is not less real because of what she leaves out. It is real because of what she leaves out. Now imagine the universe painting time the same way. A moment is rendered. A moment is chosen. A moment appears with breathtaking completeness. But the moment you expected to connect the two, the moment that would have smoothed the path, the moment that would have justified the transition, it never materializes. It was unnecessary to the structure. It was a brushstroke the universe refused to make. This is not malfunction. This is elegance. Physicists studying black holes, quantum fields, and the limits of computation have discovered a pattern that repeats across every scale. The universe does not tolerate redundancy. It compresses. It simplifies. It reduces. It treats unnecessary detail as excess heat, something to be discarded. A continuous timeline would be redundant. A perfectly smooth flow of becoming would be wasteful. So the universe keeps what matters and erases what does not. Not erases, avoids. The missing moments never exist. The skipped instants never need to be deleted. They simply never join the ledger of reality. This idea begins as a scientific whisper, but soon it becomes philosophical. If the universe optimizes itself, then your life is built on the result of those optimizations. You are living inside a reality that keeps only the moments necessary for its own coherence. Think of all the times your life changed in a breath, a sentence that altered your path, a choice that felt sudden, almost improbable, a revelation that arrived without warning, a disaster that appeared out of nowhere. Moments like these do not feel smooth. They feel abrupt, as if you were dropped into a different version of yourself without seeing the steps that led there. Maybe you did miss the steps because they were never written. Maybe the universe looked at the space between two instants and found nothing essential inside it. So, it let the outcome appear without the journey. A jump, a skip, a jump so familiar you did not realize the universe performs it constantly. If reality discards unnecessary frames, then you are living inside an edited story, not a lie, not a deception, an economy of truth, a timeline that breathes only as much as it must, a world that saves its own breath. There is something strangely comforting in this. You are not drowning in infinite possibilities. You are held by a structure that favors clarity. The universe is not a chaotic flood. It is a curated flow, but there is also something haunting. If time is curated, then so is possibility. If moments are chosen, then so are paths. If frames are skipped, then so are futures. And somewhere in the quiet space outside your awareness lies a collection of unrendered timelines, branches that never opened, breaths that never formed, instants that dissolved before the universe acknowledged them. You pass through the versions of reality that survived the culling. But deep beneath that culling lies an even stranger question. If the universe chooses which frames deserve to exist, then what happens when it chooses to skip not just a moment, but an entire region of space-time? Not a jump the size of an atom, but a jump the size of a galaxy? Because somewhere in the oldest light of the universe, a vast silence appears, a cosmic blank spot that behaves like a missing frame in the story of everything. And to reach it, we have to lift our eyes from the quantum to the sky itself, where a hole in time may be waiting. When a universe chooses which moments deserve to exist, it also chooses which versions of you get to emerge. You are shaped not only by what happens, but by what is allowed to happen. And quietly, without permission, this leads to a strange echo in the human mind. An echo that should not exist, yet refuses to disappear. It shows itself in the form of collective memories that are wrong. Not small mistakes, not personal distortions, but shared recollections, entire groups of people remembering something that reality refuses to confirm. A line in a movie that was never spoken. A logo that never had the shape you swear it had. A public event that seems to have unfolded differently in your memory than in the world's official record. These are called false memories, a term meant to close the conversation before it begins. But the tidy explanation of "the mind makes things up" does not fully account for the scale of these phenomena, or their emotional weight, or the eerie confidence with which they are recalled. It feels less like misremembering, and more like remembering a moment that belonged to a version of reality that no longer exists. A memory from a frame the universe cut from the final edit. Consider the experiments performed by cognitive scientists like Elizabeth Loftus. They demonstrated that memories are not recordings but reconstructions, rebuilt every time they are summoned. This makes them fragile, easy to distort, easy to reshape. But these experiments also uncovered something peculiar. Memories can be altered even when the person insists, with unshakable certainty, that they are correct. Certainty does not guarantee truth, but neither does it guarantee error. There is a kind of memory that feels too coherent, too detailed, too anchored to be dismissed as imagination, something that should not exist, yet lives with the same clarity as everything you are sure of. These memories behave like refugees from a missing timeline. Imagine a moment that almost happened, a version of an event the universe briefly considered before discarding the frame. Your mind, which reconstructs reality from incomplete pieces, might catch the shadow of that unchosen frame, the shape of a possibility that was nearly real enough to touch you, a memory that survived even though the moment did not. This is where the phenomenon becomes larger than psychology. It reaches toward cosmology. If time can skip a moment, perhaps occasionally consciousness leaks across the skip. Not fully, not enough to bridge timelines or rewrite physics, but just enough for a faint imprint to settle in the mind. A subtle resonance from a frame that does not belong to this continuous line of existence. It would explain why so many people recall the same non-existent details, not because they were influenced by each other, but because their minds brushed against the same discarded moment, a shared shadow of a shared absence. There is also another possibility, quieter but more profound. When the universe compresses reality, when it removes unnecessary frames, it may not erase them cleanly. The discarded frames might leave a residue in consciousness, a faint afterimage, not a full moment, not a complete event, just the emotional contour, the outline of something that almost existed. Memory is built to complete patterns, so it takes that outline and finishes the picture. You remember the moment because the universe left just enough of it behind for your mind to fill in the rest. Imagine standing in a room you have never entered and suddenly feeling the room is familiar. The light feels familiar. The air feels familiar. Even the silence feels familiar. This sensation does not come from nowhere. It may come from a version of this moment that hovered at the edge of reality before the universe chose a different frame. A memory from the wrong timeline. A whisper of a path not taken. If this feels too strange to be true, consider the brain's relationship to time. It does not experience time directly. It builds a model of time from sensory fragments. It predicts, fills, extrapolates. It eliminates ambiguity. If time itself has missing pieces, then the brain must fill them, not because it wants to, but because it must. The brain cannot accept a blank moment, so it invents continuity. And sometimes, when the blank is too large, or the missing frame too significant, the brain reaches into its own archives, or into the faint residue of an unrendered moment, and constructs a memory that feels real, because it carries the emotional weight of something that almost was. This is why false memories feel personal. They are born from absence, not imagination. And when many minds share the same absence, they build similar memories. Collective misremembering becomes a map of missing time, a chart of where the universe skipped, a record of where the timeline folded, a soft imprint of the frames the universe declined to include. If this is true, then every mistaken memory is a clue, not about the past, but about the structure of time. The misremembered logo is not about typography. It is about a moment where reality made a decision. The swapped lines in a movie are not about dialogue. They are about a tiny skipped beat in the universe's rendering. The shared belief in an event that never happened is not delusion. It is the collective memory of a deleted frame. And here is the twist that deepens the quiet around you. If your memory can hold the shadow of a missing moment, then the boundary between existing and not existing may be thinner than anyone imagined. Reality may not be a clean stream but a braided river, with strands of possibility brushing against each other. Before diverging or dissolving, your mind might occasionally dip into the current of a moment that did not survive. A moment that the universe tested, considered, and discarded. A moment you were never meant to remember, yet somehow do. And the deeper this idea settles, the more it points toward a vast, silent anomaly waiting far beyond the mind. Because the universe itself has a memory written across the sky, a memory of its earliest moments, frozen in light, older than every star you have ever seen. And in that cosmic memory, there is a missing piece too large to ignore. A region of the sky where something should exist, but does not. A hole in the oldest frame of time. A missing moment on a cosmic scale. And to understand it, you will have to step beyond the human mind and into the background glow of the universe itself, where absence becomes visible. If the mind can remember echoes of moments that never existed, and if particles can leap through states without passing through the path between them, then the next place to look for missing frames is not inside you or beneath you, but above you, spread across the oldest light the universe has ever released. Long before the first galaxies formed, before stars opened their eyes, before atoms even knew how to bind themselves together, the universe was glowing. A soft, uniform light filling every direction. This glow, now stretched thin by billions of years of expansion, still surrounds us. It is called the cosmic microwave background, the afterimage of creation itself. If reality were perfectly smooth, this ancient light should also be perfectly smooth. But it is not. Astronomers mapping the sky discovered a disturbance so unsettling that it was first dismissed as an error, then as a calibration mistake, then as a statistical accident. Yet every new measurement repeated the same silent contradiction. In one vast region of the universe, the background glow is colder, much colder than theory allows. A void in the light, a bruise in the fabric, a silence where a piece of the universe's earliest memory should be. They called it the cold spot. At first, it looked like a patch of sky where temperature dipped only slightly below average. But when satellites like WMAP and later Planck measured it with greater precision, the anomaly deepened. It was not simply colder. It was too large, too empty, too stable. It behaved less like a region of space, and more like a missing frame in the film of the cosmos. Some tried to explain it as a statistical fluke. Some insisted it was caused by a massive void, a region of space nearly empty of galaxies, stretching for hundreds of millions of light years. But even that explanation bends under its own weight. A void of that scale would be among the largest structures ever discovered, and yet it would not fully explain the depth of the cold spot's silence. It does not simply lack matter, it seems to lack history, as if something that was supposed to happen there never did. Imagine the universe unfolding after the Big Bang. Moment by moment, the early plasma cools, photons scatter, and the cosmic background freezes into place like dew turning into frost. Now imagine that somewhere in that process, reality hesitates. A region of space-time does not receive the same sequence of updates as its surroundings. A patch of the young universe loses a moment or several and is forced to continue without them. The missing instants would leave no trace of themselves. Their absence would simply make the region quieter, emptier, colder. A cosmic cold spot would not be a wound, it would be a skip. A place where time did not create one of the frames it was meant to. Some cosmologists have suggested exotic explanations: collisions with other universes, imprints from pre-Big Bang structures, remnants of cosmic textures, rare topological defects in spacetime. Each theory tries to wrap language around a phenomenon that behaves like a hole in time's continuity. Yet the simplest explanation is one we hesitate to say out loud. The universe may have skipped something here. Not failed, not broken. Skipped. A region so vast that the missing frame echoes across billions of years of cosmic history. This idea whispers back to everything seen so far, to the clocks that detect tiny irregularities, to the particles that jump without traveling, to the memories that bloom from moments that never existed, to the mind that fills its own absences with phantom truths. The universe's first memory suffers its own blank spot. A silence woven into the sky. A silence no theory fully absorbs. A silence that behaves like a large-scale counterpart to the missing micro-instants you never feel. Imagine standing beneath that patch of sky, invisible to your eyes, yet older than every star you have ever known. Above you stretches a region where something essential failed to arrive. Perhaps a fluctuation that never rose, perhaps a ripple that never formed, perhaps a moment that the universe intended to create, one that would have seeded galaxies, shaped voids, drawn patterns in the cosmic web. But the instant froze before it could happen, a skipped cosmic heartbeat. And in the wake of that silent pulse, the fabric cooled slightly more than elsewhere, not colder because of emptiness, but colder because a moment was missing. If this is true, then the cold spot is not merely a region of low temperature. It is a memory of non-existence, a scar left not by violence, but by absence, a reminder that the universe may not update evenly, that it may skip large regions of its own unfolding, just as it skips the microseconds inside your awareness. This raises a question that is heavier than it seems. If the universe can skip a moment for an entire region of space, could it skip a moment for an entire species, an entire era, an entire civilization? Could history have missing frames too large for any memory to capture? because the sky is not done whispering. There are other anomalies hiding in the background glow, a faint axis running through the universe like a crease in fabric, aligning structures that should not align. An improbable order in the randomness of the cosmic microwave background, a directionality in the oldest light, as if the universe prefers some frames over others, as if the cosmic film once slipped, not in a blink, but in a sweep, and that sweep leads deeper into the possibility that time's structure is not uniform across the cosmos. Something is pulling at the history of the universe, something that may reveal why time sometimes feels thin, why certain moments collapse into silence, while others unfold with impossible clarity. To understand it, we must leave the ancient light behind and step toward the speed of light itself, where the true resolution of time begins to blur, and where the next missing frame waits to be uncovered. The cold spot leaves a question suspended in the dark. If an entire region of the universe can carry the shadow of a missing moment, then what does that say about the smallest pieces of reality, the particles that race through space-time with the precision of a heartbeat? To answer that, we look not into the vast silence of space, but into the speed of light itself. Light has always been our clock, our ruler, our guide. It defines how quickly information can travel and how clearly reality can reveal itself. For centuries, scientists treated the speed of light as a perfect constant, a smooth, unbroken metric woven into the universe. But what if that smoothness is not smooth at all? What if light is moving through something that has texture? Imagine space-time not as a continuous fabric, but as a mosaic of tiny intervals, so small you could never see them, so brief you could never feel them, yet still shaping the path every photon must follow. A pixelated universe, where time itself has resolution. As light crosses this cosmic grid, it would not glide the way you imagine. It would step, tiny, immeasurable steps, one discriminated instant after another, never flowing, always updating, like a film that never stops flickering. For the longest time, there was no way to detect such steps. Light seemed too perfect, too elegant, too clean. But as astronomers began studying photons arriving from distant gamma-ray bursts, explosions so bright they ignite half the universe, a pattern began to emerge. The highest energy photons do not always arrive at the same time as their low-energy companions, even though they should. They travel across billions of light years, crossing the void shoulder to shoulder, yet they reach us slightly out of sync. A cosmic stutter. At first, researchers pointed to dust, to interference, to measurement errors, but the deeper they looked, the stranger the delay became. Too consistent to ignore, too small to dismiss, too patterned to blame on chance. It is as if the photons are stepping over the pixels of time differently, each energy level interacting with the grain of space-time, in ways we are only beginning to imagine. If time has a resolution, light reveals it. Picture a mountain path at night. You cannot see the stones beneath your feet, but you can feel how they change your stride. Some steps are longer, some shorter, some land on smooth rock, some on broken gravel. Light does not glide through the universe. It steps across a structure it cannot smooth out. This is why some photons arrive early and others late, not because they are faster, but because the ground beneath them is uneven. The universe flickers. Time vibrates. The path is not continuous. Even more unsettling, these tiny delays appear to accumulate, not in a linear rhythm, but as if light is encountering random patches where time is slightly thinner or slightly denser, like a road that briefly loses pavement, like a frame that never fully forms. If photons travel through these missing intervals, they might feel the absence the same way the clocks feel it, not as a void, but as a shift, a sudden change in the rhythm of existence. There is an experiment where physicists try to push lasers to absurd precision, looking for any tremble in their travel. And at the highest resolutions, the beam begins to shimmer in a way that cannot be traced to any mechanical cause, a noise that should not exist, a noise that looks less like random vibration and more like the boundary of something, the boundary of space-time's resolution, as if the laser is brushing against the edge of the pixel over and over again. This raises a delicate possibility. Light is not simply revealing the universe. Light is revealing the universe's limitations. not because reality is broken, but because reality is efficient. If time is made of discrete units, if space-time is made of grains, if the universe updates frame by frame, then light is the messenger moving through those frames at the upper limit allowed by existence. And every time it crosses a boundary between frames, the universe must decide how to let it through. A slight delay, a slight acceleration, a slight ripple, a tiny reminder that the path it travels is not infinitely divisible. There is a thought that sometimes emerges in the quiet of scientific speculation. Light does not reveal time. Light survives it. Light does not trace a continuous world. It bridges the gaps. And if photons can bridge the gaps, then perhaps they also record them, arriving at our instruments with faint scars from the missing instants they passed through. But here is the twist that widens the silence. If time has pixels, then reality has edges. Edges where moments dissolve. Edges where the universe does not bother to compute the in-between. Edges where the smallest tick of existence collides with the next. And if edges exist at the microscopic level, then they must exist at the macroscopic level as well. The cold spot may be one such edge. The memory of a region where the pixels failed to update. The imprint of a cosmic moment that never made it into the final rendering. But edges do not always form in the sky. Sometimes they form inside you, in the mind, in awareness, in the fragile moments where consciousness flickers, like a photon crossing the grain of space-time. And to understand how these edges shape the flow of your life, you must look at time not as a structure outside you, but as something collapsing and reappearing within you. Because the next frame you inhabit is shaped by the frames that never came to be. If light reveals the grain of time, then what lies beneath that grain? What holds the pixels in place? What anchors the instants that the universe chooses to create and the instants it quietly avoids? To find the answer, you must shrink yourself far smaller than light, far smaller than atoms, far smaller than anything you have ever imagined. You must enter the scale where space-time stops behaving like fabric and begins behaving like foam. Physicist John Wheeler once suggested that if you zoom far enough into the structure of space-time, you will no longer find smoothness. You will find turbulence, froth, violent fluctuations, a seething, boiling foundation where time and space flicker in and out of existence so quickly that the concept of before and after becomes almost meaningless. This is called quantum foam. It is the level where space-time itself is unstable, not broken, but undecided. At this scale, distance loses definition, time loses coherence, causality wavers, particles emerge from nothing and vanish into nothing, as if reality is sampling possibilities, choosing which ones to keep. A place where missing frames are not exceptions, but the rule. Imagine trying to walk across a floor made not of wood or stone, but of soap bubbles constantly forming and collapsing beneath your feet. Each step would land on something different. Sometimes a stable bubble, sometimes a bursting void. Time, at the level of quantum foam, behaves exactly this way. Every instant you experience is a stable bubble that survived the collapse. Millions of others did not. The foam beneath space-time is a battlefield of potential moments, all forming, all dissolving, all struggling to become the next real instant. Most never make it. Most never stabilize. Most vanish before reality can recognize them. The universe selects only a thin chain of these bubbling possibilities and calls them time. This is the deepest reason why time appears to have gaps. It does, not because they open later, but because they existed from the very beginning, long before clocks trembled, long before photons stuttered, long before your consciousness flickered between frames. Space-time itself was blinking, choosing which of its microscopic bubbles deserved to become something more. Physicists studying loop quantum gravity propose that space is made of discrete loops, finite grains, quantized units. Between those units are intervals that cannot exist, forbidden distances, forbidden instants, edges where reality does not allow itself to be continuous. These are the missing frames of space-time. At this level, a jump is not a glitch. It is the only way anything can happen. There is no in-between. because the in-between does not exist long enough to matter. Every motion is a series of arrivals. Every change is a sequence of appearances. Every moment is a decision. The universe breathes by collapsing foam. What you call time is simply the rhythm of what survives. Now, imagine how strange this is from the universe's perspective. Each moment is not born from smooth evolution, but from a competition, a contest between countless flickers, all trying to stabilize long enough to be rendered. Your reality is the outcome of that contest, not the average, not the blend, the survivors, the bubbles strong enough to endure the collapse of everything around them. This gives a new meaning to the gaps in your life. If time is made of bubbles forming and collapsing, then every missing moment is simply a bubble that burst before it became real. Every blank feeling, every forgotten second, every slippage in awareness is the mind's echo of this cosmic instability. You live on the surface of a storm, yet you feel only the calm. But there is a deeper twist. If space-time bubbles appear and collapse constantly, then the universe is not a single evolving timeline. It is a sea of temporary structures, bubbles that almost became your reality, but did not. A vast background of aborted moments. And sometimes, those aborted moments leave faint impressions. They do not become real, but they come close enough that their ghost-like textures brush against the instants that do survive. A shiver of déjà vu, a memory that feels borrowed, a sensation that something is missing, not because your mind failed, but because the universe itself let go of a moment. Just before you arrived in it, consciousness may be the foam translated into meaning, your mind interpreting which bubbles stabilized and which collapsed. And if this is true, then you have never lived continuously. You have only lived in the islands that survived the sea. This brings us to an even stranger question, one that expands until it touches both the mind and the cosmos. If space-time is foam, why do the bubbles sometimes align on enormous scales? Why do entire regions of the universe, like the cold spot, behave as if whole swaths of foam collapsed at once? What kind of force could synchronize the failure of moments across distances so large that no signal could ever travel between them? To answer that, we must look not at the depths of space-time, but at the structure of time itself, the way its pieces decide where to connect and where to fall apart. Because hidden inside the foam is a pattern, a faint, unlikely alignment that stretches across the sky as if the universe carries a seam, a direction where time prefers to skip. And that seam leads us into the next anomaly, a larger one, a stranger one. A clue written into the architecture of the cosmos, where time does not simply flicker, but bends. There are mysteries so small they escape your senses entirely, and there are mysteries so large they reshape the sky. But then there are those rare enigmas that live in between phenomena that are neither microscopic nor cosmic, but something stranger, something that behaves like a bridge between scales. If space-time foam flickers beneath existence, and if the cold spot whispers of a missing frame across billions of light years, then somewhere in the middle must lie a moment where the universe reveals, however briefly, the mechanism behind its choices. This moment has been seen not through telescopes, not through cosmic radiation, but through particle experiments so precise they feel like interrogations of reality. A moment where time does not behave the way time should. A moment where the universe pauses, subtly, silently, unnervingly, as if reconsidering its next move. Scientists call what they observed an anomalous decay window. A window so brief, it barely earns the name, yet so persistent, it refuses to be dismissed. The experiment unfolds like this. A muon, a tiny particle, unstable by nature, is created inside a magnetic trap. The muon should decay into an electron and two elusive neutrinos, and according to the equations of physics, this decay should occur with perfect randomness inside a predictable average lifetime. A muon does not know when it will die, but the universe knows the statistical shape of its death. Yet, during certain experiments, the decay does not behave statistically. Something happens instead, a hesitation, a stillness, a micro-interval where the muon appears neither stable nor decaying, as if trapped between states. The detectors see it. The data shows it. A plateau where no plateau should exist. Not a smooth transition, not an error. A pause. It is as if the universe is holding its breath. To understand how strange this is, you must imagine the muon as a flickering ember in the hands of reality. Its decay is not a choice. It is a rule, a fundamental inevitability. Particles do not hesitate. They simply follow the path laid out for them by the structure of space-time. But here, in this thin experimental chamber, in this isolated magnetic field, the muon resists the moment that should annihilate it. It is not alive longer. It is suspended. It is not dying slower. It is undecided. For a brief, impossible interval, the universe behaves as though it has skipped a frame in the muon's timeline and is waiting to choose the next one. Researchers do not like words like suspension. They prefer temporal anomaly or statistical deviation, but no vocabulary can soften the implication. Reality hesitates, again and again, experiment after experiment. The hesitation appears, not randomly, not as noise, but as if the muon is listening for a cue the universe has not yet delivered. Imagine watching a candle flicker, expecting it to extinguish at any moment, and instead seeing it freeze mid-flicker, as though the air around it has stilled. That is the muon's pause. Something similar appears in other decay pathways, especially in systems cooled to near absolute zero, where particles are stripped of thermal chaos and left alone with the quiet machinery of time. When particles are this cold, their decay profiles begin to show miniature cliffs, segments where the probability curve stops evolving. Physicists stare at these plateaus with thinly masked unease. They are moments the universe should update, but does not. Moments where the particle seems to wait for a piece of reality that has not arrived. What could cause such hesitation? Some argue it is the measuring apparatus. Some say it is the influence of the magnetic field. Some propose quantum interference patterns too subtle to detect, but these explanations tremble under scrutiny. The anomalies persist even when the apparatus changes. They persist under different fields. They persist at different temperatures. They persist across continents, across laboratories, across generations of refined instruments. The hesitation is not the machines. The hesitation belongs to time. To understand why, you must think of time not as a flowing river, but as a sequence of states, each one a bead the universe threads onto a string. The muon's decay requires the universe to move from one permissible state to the next, but sometimes the next bead is missing. The next state has not yet been rendered. The foam beneath existence has not stabilized in time for the decay to proceed. So the muon waits, not because it chooses to, but because it has nowhere to go. It exists in a moment the universe cannot immediately replace. This is the closest physics has ever come to catching the universe in the act of skipping a frame. Think about this carefully. The particle does not stall. Time stalls around the particle. The muon is not pausing its decay. The timeline is pausing the transition, like a film projector that freezes for a heartbeat before the next frame clatters into place. Now imagine you could perceive this pause. Imagine a world where human senses were fine enough to feel the hesitation of a muon, the way you feel a missed heartbeat. Your experience of reality would not be smooth. You would feel the discontinuities. You would experience life as a sequence of arrivals. Your thoughts would jump. Your awareness would flicker. Your sense of continuity would feel like a fragile agreement between what exists and what nearly exists. In truth, this is already how you experience time. But the jumps are too small to notice. Your consciousness appears only in the frames the universe renders. You do not awaken in the frames it skips. The muon, however, reveals those invisible gaps. The hesitation exposes the seams in the cosmic fabric, the tiny places where the universe must decide what comes next. When the muon finally decays, it does so abruptly. The plateau ends. The cliff drops. The universe has chosen its next bead on the string. The hesitation is replaced by motion. The skipped frame is overwritten by a completed one. The muon is gone. The moment is resolved. The gap disappears, as though it had never existed. But the data remembers it. The graphs remember it. The detectors remember it. The universe may erase the missing frame, but it cannot erase the signature of the pause. A physicist once described this phenomenon privately, never in a published paper, never in a lecture, by saying, It is as if the universe blinks, very quickly, very quietly. But it blinks. If time can blink, then continuity is an illusion maintained only because the blinks are too small to disturb your awareness. But particles see them, clocks feel them, light stumbles across them. The cosmic background remembers them. Your mind echoes them. It is the same mechanism across all scales. A universal reluctance to render every instant. The muon's hesitation is the microcosmic version of the cold spot, a missing beat of reality. The cold spot is the macrocosmic version of the muon's plateau, a missing landscape of time. Both point to the same underlying truth. Time does not always update. Sometimes it stalls. Sometimes it steps over a moment. Sometimes it abandons an interval and pretends it was never necessary. And every time it does, the universe grows more efficient. Your life grows smoother. Your perception grows simpler. Your awareness glides across the gaps as if they were never there. But now there is a larger question rising. One the muon's hesitation cannot answer. A question not about moments, but about meaning. If time can skip, why does it skip these moments and not others? Why does the universe hesitate now and not then? Why do some regions of reality receive a full sequence of frames while others are left with only a partial rendering? Is the universe choosing randomly or purposefully? Is there a logic behind which moments are allowed to exist? Physics offers theories: entropy, information cost, symmetry, causality. But there is another possibility, one that grows louder the deeper you look into these anomalies. What if the universe keeps only the moments that matter? Not emotionally, not personally, structurally, moments that maximize coherence, moments that preserve stability, moments that allow reality to continue without collapsing into impossible complexity. The muon's hesitation may be a sign that the universe was deciding how to maintain its own structure. A moment where several futures were available and the next allowed frame had not yet stabilized. The universe blinked because it was choosing. And if reality chooses which frames to build, then every moment you live is the outcome of that selection. This is not destiny, not fate, not cosmic intention. It is architecture. You walk through the frames that hold the structure together. You do not walk through the ones that would break it. But what happens when the structure becomes strained? When the universe faces a moment too complex, too unstable, too ambiguous to resolve quickly? Does time skip more frames? Does the hesitation grow? Does the universe search longer for an allowed path? If so, then, somewhere in the cosmos, there must be a region where the skipped frames accumulate, where the pauses lengthen, where the structure struggles to stabilize the next moment. A place where time feels stretched, distorted, thinned. A place where the edges of reality warp, like light bending in heat. And such a place does exist, not in the foam beneath existence, not in the cold spot above, but in a phenomenon so strange it has unsettled every theory placed before it. A pattern in the cosmic background that should not exist, a directionality in the fabric of space-time, an axis of alignment across the universe, as if time itself were bending along a hidden spine. The axis waits. It has been observed. It has been measured. It has been feared. And to step into it, we must now follow the line where the universe's skipped frames become something even stranger, a signature written across the whole sky. By time that refuse to behave, there are discoveries that feel like mistakes, and then there are discoveries that feel like warnings, quiet reminders that the universe is not obligated to behave the way we expect. Up to this point, all the clues have felt scattered, like pieces of a puzzle no one is certain belongs to a single image. The trembling of the clocks, the hesitation of the muon, the missing memories, the graininess of light, the cold silence in the sky. But then a stranger anomaly appears, one so large, so impossible, that it forces everything else into alignment. It is called the axis of evil, not because it is malicious, but because it defies the fundamental symmetry the universe is supposed to obey. The cosmic microwave background, the oldest light in existence, should be random in every direction, perfectly isotropic, perfectly indifferent to orientation. Yet, when satellites like WMAP and later Planck mapped that ancient glow, They found a pattern that stretched across the entire sky. Hot and cold regions, mysteriously aligned along a single cosmic axis, as if the universe itself were tilted. No theory expected it, no model predicted it, no symmetry allowed it. This axis should not exist, and yet it does. It is not small. It spans billions of light years. It cuts across the sky like a seam in fabric, a direction along which the oldest light prefers to arrange itself. Imagine painting a room with identical strokes, only to find a long, invisible brush leaving a continuous pattern across the wall. No matter how you repaint, the pattern returns, not because you made a mistake, but because the wall itself remembers the stroke. The universe remembers something here, something older than galaxies, something older than atoms, something woven into the first detectable moments of time. Scientists resisted the anomaly at first. They rotated the data, they recalibrated the instruments, they filtered out foreground light, they removed statistical noise, they repeated the measurements, but the axis remained, a direction in the universe where something happened differently, or perhaps where something did not happen. Some proposed that the axis is the result of contamination from the solar system. Others insisted it reflected a flaw in the detectors. Still, others argued the anomaly would vanish with more precise measurements. But it did not vanish. The more precise the instruments became, the sharper the axis appeared. This is where the earlier clues begin to whisper again. A missing frame in the cosmic background, a hesitation in the decay of particles, a tremor in the ticking of clocks, a shiver in the arrival of photons. All these phenomena point to the same possibility. Time does not behave the same way everywhere. If time has resolution, if time has gaps, if time has pixels and pauses, then those imperfections might scale upward, reaching not just atoms, but galaxies. Imagine time as a vast field of grass. Close up, you see individual blades waving. Step back, and the waving becomes patterns. Step back further, and entire meadows sway in unison. If there are skipped frames at the quantum level, and skipped frames in particle decay, and skipped frames in cosmic formation, then somewhere the pattern becomes large enough to see. The axis of evil may be that pattern, a place where time skipped not a moment, but a direction. This axis behaves as if the universe once tilted its timeline, a preference, a drift, a directionality imposed not by motion, but by missing symmetry, a skipped symmetry. Some physicists propose an extraordinary explanation, that early in the universe's history, something interrupted the normal expansion. Not a force, not a collision, but a failure. A moment the universe intended to compute, but never fully resolved. A skipped frame in the structure of cosmic inflation. If inflation stuttered, even for a fraction of a second, that hesitation would ripple across the observable universe. It would freeze into the cosmic microwave background. It would imprint a direction into the sky, a preference that should not exist. The axis could be the fossil of that skipped moment, a memory of time losing track of its own symmetry. Imagine the universe as a spinning sphere, rotating with perfect balance. If, during its first instant of expansion, one microbeat were lost, the sphere would not spin perfectly. It would wobble ever so slightly. The axis of evil is that wobble. But this raises a deeper question. Why would the universe skip a moment during its own birth? Some suggest that the inflation field, responsible for the early expansion, may have encountered a limit, a place where the underlying foam of spacetime failed to stabilize quickly enough. If time cannot update at infinite speed, then the beginning may have been more fractured than we assume, a moment that needed to exist, but could not. Just like the muon's hesitation, just like the photon's uneven travel, just like the cold spot's silent region, a skipped frame at the birth of everything. There is a philosophical elegance hidden inside this anomaly. If the universe contains a direction where time behaves differently, then continuity is not global. It is local. It is conditional. It is negotiated. You do not live in the same continuity as every region of the cosmos. Your sequence of frames is stable, but stability is not guaranteed everywhere. Perhaps other regions experience time as slightly more fractured. Perhaps their instants arrive out of sync, their symmetry lost, their rhythm uneven. To you, the world feels consistent because your mind adapts to the frames it receives. To the universe, however, continuity may be a fragile achievement rather than an inherent rule. Consider what this means for life elsewhere. If time can drift, if time can tilt, if time can skip entire directional symmetries, then consciousness emerging in another region might perceive reality in ways you cannot imagine. Your thoughts come in pulses, but another mind shaped by a different cosmic rhythm might receive pulses that vary in length, in stability, in continuity. Their consciousness might awaken in frames that do not resemble yours. They might inhabit time that does not flow evenly, even at the scale of thought. But the axis suggests something even stranger. If time has a preferred direction, then your memories, too, may have a preferred direction, subtly shaped by the same cosmic choice. Your mind may not be aligned with your body, or with the planet, or with the stars, but with the structure of time that underlies the entire universe. The axis could be the backbone of your perception, an unseen architecture guiding the frames you receive. There is a quiet possibility that unsettles even the most grounded physicists. The universe might not have one timeline. It might have millions, but only some of them stabilize. Only some survive the collapse of the foam. Only some maintain symmetry long enough to permit the emergence of observers. You are living in one that solved the puzzle. The axis of evil may be the faint scar of a timeline that almost broke, but held together, a reminder that existence is not guaranteed. It is achieved. But beneath this vast anomaly lies a twist that turns everything inward again. If the universe forms large-scale patterns from skipped moments, and if space-time foam flickers beneath every instant, and if quantum jumps expose gaps too small to feel, then perhaps these patterns also exist inside the mind. Perhaps there is an axis within you, a direction along which your consciousness aligns itself, a hidden seam where attention, memory, and identity prefer to organize. Perhaps your sense of self is not centered around your body, but around a direction in time, a subtle alignment with the universe's earliest asymmetry. Think of all the moments in your life when time felt slanted, when days dragged and seconds snapped, when experiences unfolded with strange timing, when memory felt uneven, when awareness felt skewed. Perhaps these sensations are not psychological quirks. Perhaps they are the mind resonating with the same cosmic seam that shapes the oldest light in the universe. The alignment could be faint, not enough to dominate your perception, but enough to leave a pattern in your thoughts, a direction of clarity, a direction of confusion, a direction of déjà vu. The axis of the universe, mirrored inside the axis of the self. This is not mysticism, it is structural echo. The universe organizes according to its deepest rules. Life, emerging from that universe, inherits those rules. If time has an axis, so do you. And now, another question rises, one more intimate than any before. If the universe contains directions where time behaves differently, could there be directions where time behaves more clearly, where skipped frames are rarer, where continuity strengthens, where awareness feels sharper? Could consciousness steer itself along a corridor of time, where existence is less fractured? If so, some of your most profound moments, those instants of clarity, presence, alignment, may be glimpses of a region of time where the universe is not skipping, but fully present, a region where the frames arrive intact, a region where the foam stabilizes, a region where the rhythm of reality matches the rhythm of thought. But this idea touches the threshold of something even deeper, the notion that the universe is not only skipping frames, but optimizing them, choosing paths not just for geometry, but for meaning, choosing sequences of moments that maximize coherence for the observers within them, choosing timelines where consciousness can exist at all. To understand what this means, you must step into the next realization that skipped frames do not simply disappear, but shape the frames that remain. The next chapter leads there, to the place where absence becomes guidance, and where the moments you never lived quietly determine the path you walk. If the axis of evil is a cosmic seam, a boundary where the symmetry of time faltered for reasons we still do not understand, then the next question rises with a slow, inevitable gravity. Why does the universe allow some moments to exist and quietly discard others? Why are certain instants chosen, while countless alternatives dissolve before they ever become real? To approach this, you must step back from the vast sweep of galaxies and sink instead into the intimate architecture of information. Because underneath every physical law, every particle, every fluctuation of space-time, there is something more fundamental: cost. The cost of storing information, the cost of changing it, the cost of preserving and computing the next moment. This is not metaphor, it is physics. It is Landauer's principle. To erase even a single bit of information, the universe must release heat. To create a state, the universe must expend energy. To update reality, there must be computation. Existence, at its core, is expensive. A continuous, unbroken timeline would be the costliest structure imaginable. Every microsecond simulated, every path explored, every possibility computed, every particle tracked. But that is not what the universe does. It economizes, it trims, it compresses. It refuses to spend energy on anything unnecessary. It preserves only the moments that maintain coherence, the ones that allow structure, stability, and evolution to continue without collapse. In other words, the universe keeps only the moments that matter, not emotionally, not spiritually, functionally. A timeline is not made of everything that could happen. It is made of everything required for the next step to be possible. This is why photons arrive late or early. They are stepping across a grainy terrain, not a smooth continuum. This is why muons hesitate. The next permitted instant has not yet stabilized in the foam. This is why the cold spot yawns across the sky, a region where a cosmic moment failed to compute. This is why the axis of evil stretches through the background radiation, the remnant of a moment where time itself was indecisive. And this is why your own memories are a patchwork of fragments stitched across absences. Your consciousness, your identity, your story, they are all built from the frames the universe found necessary. Everything else was quietly discarded. But this raises a deeper, more haunting thought. If the universe selects only the moments that matter, then what defines matter? What determines whether an instant deserves to exist? To explore this, imagine the universe as a sculptor, but not one who carves stone, one who carves time. Each possible moment is like a fragment of marble, rough, unformed, potential. The sculptor examines it, searches for structure, for a shape that leads somewhere, for a path that will not collapse under its own weight. If the moment cannot support the next, it is discarded. If the moment increases complexity without adding stability, it is rejected. If the moment sends reality spiraling into contradiction, it is never carved at all. Only the viable moments survive. Only the coherent ones. Only the ones that maintain the structural integrity of the timeline. Your life is not built from every instant that might have occurred. It is built from the instants that allowed the next instant to exist. This is why your memories contain holes. Not because the brain is faulty, but because certain instants never stabilized enough for the mind to receive them. And this is why so many of your choices feel sudden, as if leaping from nowhere. They are the results of selection, not a smooth stream of interior thought. You experience the chosen frames. You do not experience the eliminated ones. But here is a twist that turns softly in the dark. What if the universe does not only select moments based on physics, but also based on information flow? Meaning this, the universe might keep the moments that produce the cleanest, clearest progression of information. Moments that minimize chaos. Moments that maximize predictability at large scales. Moments that allow patterns to emerge. Moments where consciousness can exist. Moments where something can be learned. If this is true, then you are not drifting through time. You are being ushered along a curated sequence of instants that preserve the possibility of understanding. A timeline optimized for coherence. This does not mean the universe favors you. It means the universe favors clarity, and you benefit from it. Because consciousness cannot arise from noise. To exist, you require a stable enough sequence of moments that memory, identity, and perception can form. A chaotic, fully rendered reality, with no skipped frames, would drown you. There would be too much information, no patterns, no continuity, no possibility of shaping the self. The missing frames are part of your survival. They remove the unnecessary. They soften the turbulence. They allow you to move through existence without being scattered. But this optimization does something else, something strange and subtle. It steers your life, not through intention or fate, through compression. Imagine two possible versions of the same event. One is complex, unstable, unpredictable, a branching explosion of possibilities. The other is simpler, more structured, more compatible with the frames that came before and after. The universe will choose the second one, again and again, moment after moment, selection after selection. This is not destiny. It is efficiency. Your timeline is shaped by the cost of computation, far more than by the illusion of your choices. But this does not make your choices meaningless. It simply changes what choice means. When you decide something, you are choosing among available frames, the ones the universe has computed as viable. You never choose the impossible. You never choose the unrendered. You never choose the discarded. The range of your decisions is the range of stable frames available in the foam. This quietly explains why certain paths in your life feel easy and others feel impossible. Why some relationships ignite instantly while others never spark. Why some opportunities fall into your hands and others dissolve before you reach them. You are not failing. Those moments never stabilized. The universe did not compute the frames where those outcomes could exist. And so you walk a path, narrower than you think, yet rich enough to allow consciousness to bloom. This idea is not depressing. It is liberating. You do not have to fight against the missing frames. You simply move within the ones that exist. There is another layer to this optimization, one that reveals itself when you look closely at how information travels through systems, from atoms to minds to civilizations. Information prefers pathways of minimal resistance. Patterns prefer simplicity. Systems prefer stability. And time honors these preferences. If a moment increases coherence, it survives. If a moment increases entropy but stabilizes the structure, it survives. If a moment increases chaos without purpose, it is skipped. This selection shapes everything, even thought. When an idea clicks in your mind, it is not because of magic. It is because the neural configuration required for that thought is compatible with the next frame the universe computes. When you suddenly understand something, you are aligning with a viable moment. The idea was always possible, but you entered the frame where it stabilizes. This is why insight feels like falling into place, because that is exactly what it is, a frame sliding into alignment. Yet, there is a deeper twist waiting here. If the universe selects moments that maximize coherence, then consciousness is not merely a product of time. Consciousness is a collaborator. Your awareness is a filter. It amplifies certain patterns. It stabilizes certain narratives. It strengthens certain frames simply by focusing on them. When you pay attention, you reduce informational chaos. Your mind becomes a stabilizing structure. You reinforce the viability of the frames you inhabit. You participate in the selection. This means the universe is not simply choosing frames for you. It is choosing frames with you. Your attention shapes the path of your timeline. Not by magic, by information cost, moments become more likely to exist. When your mind can sustain them, moments disappear when your attention cannot. This reveals something quietly profound. The universe does not waste what you are willing to hold. But this leads to yet another question, one deeper, darker, more intimate. If the universe keeps only the moments that matter, then what about the moments that mattered to you, but did not survive? What about the almost loves, the almost choices, the almost versions of yourself that flickered for a moment, then collapsed? Where do they go? Do they dissolve completely? Do they echo in your memory as fragments of dreams? Do they haunt you as feelings of unfinishedness? Do they leave faint emotional residues? The sense that you nearly lived a life that never stabilized? And more importantly, do they shape the frames that did survive? Because even discarded moments exert influence. A skipped frame casts a shadow. A missing instant shifts the weight of the timeline. A lost possibility changes the direction of the next viable one. Your life is not defined only by what happened. It is defined by everything that almost happened. And this leads to the next step. If skipped frames shape the path you walk, then the architecture of the mind must reflect this, not as memory, but as structure. Your consciousness is not built from the moments you lived. It is built from the boundary between what lived and what did not. To understand how this boundary shapes identity, we must enter the next domain, where the mind itself becomes a structure of choices and where time and thought share the same mechanism of omission. A place where the frames you never received are as important as the frames you did. And to reach that place, we now drift toward the architecture of attention, where the universe and the mind skip together. If the universe chooses its moments, if time rides the edge between what exists and what never forms, then the mind cannot stand apart from that machinery. Consciousness does not float above space-time. It is anchored inside it, shaped by its instants, bounded by its omissions, woven directly into the pattern of selected frames. You do not experience time. You experience the sequence the universe allows. And somewhere within that curated sequence, your attention becomes a collaborator, not a passive observer, but a participant in the selection of the next moment. To understand this, you must look at how the brain actually sees the world. It does not gather every detail. It does not process every particle of information reaching your senses. It chooses. There is too much data arriving every second, far too much for any neural structure to handle. So the brain performs the same act you have seen the universe perform. It throws most of it away. You experience only a sliver of what surrounds you, a narrow corridor of relevance, a path of perception carved from the vastness of possibility. Your mind, like the universe, keeps only the frames that matter to its coherence. Think of a moment when your attention locks onto something, a sound, a word, a face, a memory, a tiny detail whose weight feels out of proportion to its size. When this happens, the neural circuitry does not simply notice. It reorganizes itself. It increases the precision of prediction. It allocates energy. It narrows the bandwidth of awareness. It discards competing possibilities. And in that act of narrowing, your attention stabilizes the moment. You give the universe a simpler sequence to compute. This is why focused awareness feels like clarity, because clarity is coherence, and coherence is cheap for the universe to sustain. Moments that align with your attention are easier for the universe to keep. Moments you refuse to acknowledge fade from the computational map. This is not mysticism. It is information theory. Everything that exists is a flow of information. Everything that persists reduces uncertainty. Everything that collapses increases entropy. Attention reduces uncertainty. Attention collapses alternatives. Attention defines which fragments of experience matter enough to be carried forward. You are not choosing the timeline, but you are contributing to its cost equation. The universe and the mind optimize the same thing: coherence. This is why memory is selective. This is why perception is incomplete. This is why identity narrows around certain images, certain stories, certain recurring patterns. Your mind is a compression engine. It removes the frames that would overwhelm you. It keeps only the ones that support the narrative of self. You might think this is a limitation, but it is not. It is structure. Without omission, you would dissolve. Imagine a world where you perceived everything, every sound, every vibration, every photon, every fluctuation in the air, every possibility of thought. The mind would collapse beneath the weight of unfiltered existence. Consciousness is possible only because most of reality is removed before it reaches awareness. The universe does the same thing with time. It removes the unnecessary. It compresses the timeline. It discards the unstable. It keeps the viable sequence. And here is the twist that binds these two processes together. The mind does not merely adapt to the universe's omissions. It mirrors them. Your attention flickers in discrete pulses, just like the frames of time. Your thoughts appear in bursts, not in a smooth stream. Neurons fire in rhythmic clusters, 40 Hz gamma bursts, theta modulations, patterns of synchronization and silence. Awareness is not continuous. It is a chain of awakenings, just like time. Between the pulses of attention, your mind goes dark. not unconscious, just paused, waiting, updating, rebuilding its model of reality for the next instant. If you could speed up your perception, you would see your own awareness stutter. You would feel yourself arriving in each moment rather than flowing through it. You would feel the skipped frames. And in rare circumstances, during meditation, during trauma, during deep awe, during near-death experiences, people report something uncanny. Time stops, then resumes. Awareness freezes, then returns. The world shudders like a camera, a single instant stretched too far, followed by a sudden leap. Most describe it as timelessness. Some call it clarity. Others describe it as stepping outside their life and watching it continue without them. But what they are feeling, perhaps, is the moment where the brain's internal frames lose alignment with the universe's external frames. A gap, a misfire, a brief mismatch between the rhythm of consciousness and the rhythm of existence. When the two rhythms desynchronize, time feels broken. When they realign, time returns. This phenomenon mirrors the muon's hesitation, a moment refusing transition, a moment waiting for coherence. Your mind does the same thing every day, but you experience it only when the mismatch grows too large to disguise. Now consider dreams. Dreams are realities that run at a different frame rate. They are coherent within themselves, but detached from the world's physical timeline. In dreams, events skip freely. Time behaves without regard for continuity. Moments arrive without intermediates. Entire sequences unfold without explanation. A skipped frame in the universe produces anomalies in the sky. A skipped frame in the mind produces dreams. This parallel is not trivial. It suggests something fundamental. The mind already knows how to operate in a discontinuous reality. Dreams may not be escapes from coherence, but rehearsals for it. Simulations of existence in a universe where continuity is optional. The brain's willingness to accept impossible transitions, a corridor turning into a forest, a stranger becoming a childhood friend, a moment rewinding, skipping, looping, is not a flaw. It is a blueprint. Your consciousness is built to handle missing frames. It evolved in a universe that never promised continuity. But the deepest connection between the mind and time is not found in attention, nor in dreams, nor in perception. It is found in identity, your sense of self. The I you believe persists through time is not a continuous entity. It is a reconstruction performed moment by moment. Each frame of awareness creates a slightly different version of you. Your mind stitches those versions together into a narrative, but the stitching is selective. Bad memories fade. Important ones crystallize. Traumatic ones distort. Neutral ones dissolve. The mind keeps only the frames that maintain the story. Just like the universe, you are a collaboration of survived instants, a chain of optimized frames, a sequence of self-stabilizing patterns. And the self you carry today is not the cumulative result of every moment you lived. It is the sum of moments that stabilized strongly enough to influence the next. Moments with enough informational weight to justify their cost. Moments the universe allowed and the mind reinforced. This is why identity shifts, why growth feels nonlinear, why the person you were 5 years ago feels like a different organism, why grief can collapse the self, why love can rewrite it, why trauma can shatter it. Certain frames lose coherence and are no longer carried forward. Others become anchors, around which the self reorganizes. Identity is not continuity. Identity is compression. It is the mind doing to the self what the universe does to time. But here is the twist. Because the mind and the universe share the same selection logic, they sometimes skip in unison. There are moments in life, rare, fragile, unforgettable, where time seems to sharpen, where experience feels more real, more vivid, more anchored than anything around it. Births, deaths, epiphanies, accidents, awakenings, crises, moments of breathtaking beauty, moments of unbearable loss. These points in the timeline feel different because the mind and the universe have selected the same frame with overwhelming precision, a frame that cannot be discarded, a frame that is too coherent to skip, a frame that remains stable in every version of the timeline that surrounds it. These are absolute moments, the instants that survive every compression on both sides of reality. You remember them with clarity, not because they were intense, but because they were structurally inevitable. These are the moments where the mind and the universe align, where your internal frame rate matches the external frame rate, where consciousness becomes transparent to the structure of time. These moments do not last. The alignment drifts. The rhythms desynchronize. But once you have felt one, you never forget it. You were present in a way you did not know you could be. And that raises a final question. One, the next chapter will follow more deeply. If the mind can align with the universe's selection of frames, is it possible for the mind to influence time's selection in return? Not by forcing events, but by shaping coherence. Not by breaking physics, but by reducing informational cost. Not by altering the world, but by altering the clarity with which you move through it. If attention stabilizes moments, if emotion reinforces frames, if clarity reduces chaos, then perhaps consciousness is not merely carried by time. Perhaps consciousness guides it. To explore that possibility, we must step deeper into the architecture of awareness, where perception becomes the boundary of time and where the frames you do not see are shaping the life you have yet to live. If the mind can skip with the universe, if consciousness flickers between allowed instants, just as space-time itself flickers beneath every breath, then the idea of continuity becomes something fragile, almost decorative, a story you tell yourself to soften the truth. You live as though time is a smooth ribbon, unbroken, unwavering, a single unrolling thread pulling you from birth to death. But continuity is not truth. Continuity is comfort, and comfort is something the universe does not guarantee. Consider the moments when continuity feels natural, when you are walking, speaking, forgetting yourself in the rhythm of movement, losing hours to routine, feeling the day slide forward with no sharp edges. These are not signs of time flowing smoothly. These are signs that your mind has successfully filled the gaps. The brain is a master illusionist, not because it deceives you maliciously, but because the alternative would be unbearable. If you saw the fragmented nature of existence too clearly, if you perceived every skipped instant, every transition that was never rendered, every boundary where consciousness disappears and returns, you would never feel stable. You would shatter beneath the flicker. So the mind constructs a continuous self, not because the universe provides continuity, but because consciousness demands it. Continuity is a hallucination required for sanity. Your entire sense of I is built from that hallucination. You feel like one person because your mind narrates you as one. You feel like a single thread because your brain cannot survive as many. But if you examine your own experience carefully, not the story you tell yourself, but the raw sensation beneath it, you begin to see the seams. You lose minutes without noticing. You jump from one thought to another with no memory of the path. You walk blocks without recalling a single detail. You reread paragraphs you do not remember reading. You drive entire distances with no awareness of your hands on the wheel. Where were you during the missing parts? Not distracted, not inattentive, not failing. You were absent from the frames the universe did not render. The illusion of continuity swept you across the gaps, as though they were never there. Your mind is not flawed. Your mind is synchronized with a discontinuous universe. The skipped moments do not disturb you, because you were never inside them. This forces a deeper realization, one that makes the air around you feel thinner. You have never experienced continuous existence. You have only experienced selected instants, linked by inference. The flow of life is not something you perceive, it is something you assemble. And yet, despite this, you feel whole. How? Because your mind has evolved a solution so elegant that even knowing the truth cannot undo it. It predicts the next frame. It fills the spaces between moments, with expectation, with memory, with interpretation, with narrative. You glide from one instant to the next, on rails built entirely from anticipation. Anticipation is the mortar that binds your timeline. Without it, you would dissolve into flicker. When you look at someone's face, You do not see every shift in expression. You predict most of it. Your visual cortex receives fragments and constructs continuity between them. When you listen to someone's voice, you do not hear each vibration. You predict the pattern and fill in the gaps. When you move your hand, you do not sense every micro step of motion. You predict where the hand will be and accept the prediction as perception. The brain is not a passive observer. It is an active timekeeper, guessing, revising, smoothing, inserting. Where the universe leaves silence, the mind inserts song. This raises an unsettling but inevitable question. If continuity is something you construct and not something the universe provides, then how much of your life is prediction and how much is reality? When you recall yesterday, you do not retrieve a perfect recording. You reconstruct a plausible sequence. Based on fragments, you infer the continuity. When you imagine tomorrow, you do not foresee events. You project a continuation of pattern. You invent the continuity. The difference between memory and imagination is smaller than it feels. Both are reconstructions, built to preserve the illusion of flow. This becomes clearest in moments of disruption, when something breaks the mind's ability to predict. Accidents, unexpected news, sudden beauty, sudden tragedy, the shock of unfamiliarity. In these moments, time feels different, sharper, slower, heavier, strangely stretched. Why? Because you are no longer gliding on prediction. You are experiencing raw frames, without the smoothing layer of narrative. You are touching the discontinuity directly. The shock does not slow time. It removes your ability to skip with it. You are forced to inhabit every rendered instant, because the mind can no longer rely on expectation. That intensity, that hyperpresence, is what reality feels like. When the illusion breaks, now imagine the opposite. The moments when time collapses, when hours vanish, when the day blurs, when your sense of self dissolves in routine or exhaustion. These are not signs of paying less attention. They are signs of moving entirely by prediction with minimal sensory input. The brain is skipping aggressively, making enormous leaps, filling vast spans of unrendered detail. You are not losing time. You are surfing across missing frames with remarkable efficiency. Continuity, in this sense, is not a truth you perceive. It is a rhythm you synchronize to, and the rhythm can be broken. This is why certain neurological conditions fracture time perception, why certain psychedelic states turn moments inside out, why trauma dislocates memory from sequence, why meditation expands a single instant into what feels like eternity. These experiences do not distort time. They reveal its structure. Time is not a line. Time is a selection. Continuity is not fundamental. Continuity is chosen, and the chooser is both the universe and the mind. But this realization contains a twist, one more delicate than anything before. If continuity is constructed, then it can be shaped, not the external timeline. You cannot command the universe to render more frames or remove fewer gaps, but you can shape the internal timeline, the narrative that binds your awareness to the world. And in doing so, you alter your experience of time in ways that are not illusory, but structural. Consider presence. Presence is not an emotion. It is a synchronization, a moment when the mind stops predicting and begins receiving, when attention overrides expectation, when perception outruns narrative. In such moments, you experience more frames. Consciousness becomes denser. Time becomes slower. Reality becomes richer. You are not imagining it. You are aligning yourself with the rendered frames, instead of gliding across the skipped ones. This is why silence feels profound, why breath feels anchoring, why the simplest actions, a hand touching cold water, a voice in the dark, a single beam of sunlight, can restore a sense of truth. You are experiencing existence without the buffer of prediction. But presence is difficult to hold because prediction is efficient. The mind wants to skip. The universe wants to skip. Continuity wants to vanish into anticipation. Yet, when you cultivate awareness, you change the internal cost function. You make the next frame easier to render clearly. You reduce informational noise. You strengthen coherence. And in doing so, you subtly influence how your own timeline unfolds. Your life becomes less random, less fractured, less turbulent, not because the world changes, but because you are receiving more of it, as it truly occurs. There is a quiet implication here, one that feels like a whisper from the edge of the universe. The more aware you are, the fewer frames you skip. The more unconscious you are, the more your mind fills the gaps with guesses, patterns, habits, illusions. Awareness gives you access to the structure of time. Inattention forces you deeper into the illusion of continuity. But there is one more edge to this understanding, a twist that opens a new corridor of thought. If the universe selects only the moments that maintain coherence, and if the mind selects only the perceptions that preserve narrative, then selfhood is not a continuous thread at all. Selfhood is a pattern of alignments. You are not the sum of your moments. You are the alignment across them, the resonance that survives the gaps, the structure that persists, even when the frames disappear. This is why identity can survive amnesia, why trauma can erase memory, but not the self, why people emerge from coma with intact personality, despite missing entire segments of time. The self is not defined by moments. The self is defined by the pattern that bridges them, a pattern strong enough to survive omission, a pattern stable enough to pass through discontinuity, a pattern coherent enough that the universe continues to select frames in which that pattern remains possible. And now, as you drift deeper into this realization, a new question begins to surface. If continuity is not inherent, if it is constructed, if identity is a pattern that survives the skips, then what happens? When the skips grow larger, what happens? When awareness thins to its breaking point? When the gap widens between perception and existence? When consciousness does not update fast enough to anchor the next frame? Does the self fracture, or does something else emerge? Because somewhere beyond continuity lies an even stranger truth. You do not merely survive the missing frames. You are built from them. And to understand what that means, to see how absence becomes the womb of identity, you must step into the next region of this journey, where time does not only skip, it reorganizes who you are. If continuity never existed, and if identity is merely the pattern that survives across skipped frames, then the next realization arrives with a quiet, overwhelming strangeness. You are not shaped by the moments you lived. You are shaped by the moments you did not live. Every missing instant, every gap in memory, every flicker where consciousness goes dark, casts a shadow that guides the next moment you inhabit. You are, in a profound sense, a creature sculpted by absence. To understand this, you must imagine the mind not as a container of memories, but as a coastline shaped by tides, by presence and by withdrawal, by the waves you feel, and by the waves that never reach the shore. Your timeline is not a line. It is a shoreline. Its shape comes from erosion as much as accumulation. Consider the simplest fact of experience. Your awareness is not always present. It drifts, dims, stutters, vanishes, then returns. You blink, but not only with your eyes. You blink with your mind. Entire spans of time disappear, yet your identity continues uninterrupted. How is that possible? Because identity is not stored in moments. Identity is stored in the structure between moments, like the pattern of notes in a song, that emerges only when silence frames them. If you remove the silence, the music collapses. In the same way, the missing frames of your life are not defects. They are the negative space that shapes who you are. The brain knows this intuitively. Neural circuits reinforce memories, not by preserving continuous sequences, but by stabilizing the edges, the boundaries where one moment transitions into the next. You do not remember the entire day you fell in love. You remember flashes, a look, a sentence, a breath, a light falling across someone's face. The rest of the day disappeared, and yet those missing pieces make the remaining fragments shine. Absence sharpens meaning. A moment grows significant, not because of what it contains, but because of what surrounds it. Like a star in the night sky, defined by the vast darkness around it. Your mind does not fear the missing pieces. It uses them. It builds identity from what remains, after everything else dissolves. And the universe does the same thing with time. If a moment destabilizes, if it adds complexity without coherence, if it introduces unpredictability without pattern, the timeline does not keep it. The universe lets go. This selective deletion is not destruction. It is refinement. It is the cosmic equivalent of pruning a tree, removing the branches that strain the structure, so the remaining ones thrive. Your memories prune themselves. Your personality prunes itself. Your perception prunes itself. Consciousness is not continuous, because continuity is inefficient. Each missing instant makes the next one sharper. Now consider déjà vu, that strange tremor of recognition, when a moment feels repeated, even though logic insists it is new. Many explain it psychologically, some explain it neurologically, but there is a deeper interpretation that fits the structure of time you have now seen. Déjà vu may be the residue of a moment that failed to stabilize, but brushed close enough to reality to leave an imprint, a moment that the universe almost allowed, but discarded at the last second, a missing frame your mind still sensed, because the prediction machinery had already begun preparing for it. You remember the ghost of a non-existent moment. This is not delusion. It is side effect. It is the byproduct of existing inside a timeline assembled from survivors. The same phenomenon appears in the architecture of your choices. Think of every decision you almost made, the words you nearly spoke, the actions you nearly took, the paths you nearly walked. Most of them collapse before you even become aware of them. The mind evaluates possibilities and discards the unstable ones. Before they ever reach consciousness, you experience only the option that survives the collapse. This is why your decisions often feel immediate, as if they arise fully formed. Your awareness receives the stabilized frame, not the turbulent landscape of possibilities that preceded it. You are living only the tip of the iceberg. The submerged part, the unstable, discarded potential, is larger, richer, stranger than anything you consciously perceive. Your identity rests on the narrow sequence of choices that survived the others, but this introduces a twist that touches the core of selfhood. If who you are depends on which frames survive, then who you could have been depends on the skipped frames. And those skipped frames leave emotional residue. This is why regret feels so haunting, why longing feels so deep, why lost possibilities ache like phantom limbs. You are mourning versions of yourself that never stabilized long enough to live. You feel the gravity of unrendered timelines. Perhaps this is why dreams carry such emotional force. Dreams are where the brain rehearses the unstable frames, the ones that cannot survive daylight reality. Dreams are your mind, exploring discarded timelines, testing patterns, simulating futures, processing unresolved frames. When you dream, you are not entering fantasy. You are entering possibility, a realm where the rules of coherence loosen, where stability requirements relax, and where the unconscious can wander through the landscape of moments. The waking world rejected. This is why dreams skip freely, why continuity dissolves, why identities shift, why places transform. The dreaming mind lives closer to the structure of time than the waking mind does. It moves through missing frames as easily as through rendered ones. It explores the negative space that waking consciousness cannot sustain. But dreams also reveal something deeper. Your identity is not fixed. It is fractal. It contains many versions that never became real. In dreams, these versions bloom and dissolve without resistance. The self is not a single line. It is a cloud of possibilities, held together by the thin thread of coherence the universe maintains for you. The waking self is a compression, a compromise, a stable subset of everything you could be. And when certain possibilities dissolve too quickly, you feel it as doubt. When they dissolve too slowly, you feel it as anxiety. When they linger without stabilizing, you feel it as yearning. These emotions are not flaws. They are signals from the boundary between rendered and unrendered self. signals from the missing frames. Now consider time not as an external river, but as an internal architecture, as something sculpted jointly by the universe and the mind. Time is the pattern of instants that survive. Identity is the pattern of interpretations that endure. But beneath both patterns lies an even more subtle truth. You do not simply move through time, you emerge from it. At every instant, you are rebuilt, not copied, but reassembled. From the fragments of memory, prediction, emotion, attention. You are not the same person you were a second ago, nor are you completely new. You are the intersection of everything that survived and everything that dissolved. The mind's job is not to preserve you, but to maintain your coherence. When this function weakens, under stress, under trauma, under illness, identity destabilizes. The timeline splinters, memory stutters, continuity fails. You lose not the moments, but the ability to connect them. This reveals something essential. Identity is not layered on top of time. Identity is a property of time. When time's structure becomes fractured, so does the self. When time becomes thick and dense in meaning, the self becomes sharp. When time becomes thin, the self becomes ghost-like. This is why certain moments define you permanently, because they were rendered with such clarity that the structure of the timeline shifted around them. These defining moments are not continuous with your life. They reconfigure it. They become new anchor points. For the reconstruction of identity, you do not remember them. You reorganize around them. You are not living a continuous self that happens to experience fractures. You are a fractured self that happens to experience continuity. Here, at this delicate edge, another question rises. A question you may have felt before, during moments of deep confusion, or profound insight, or emotional shock. If identity is rebuilt every moment, what stops it from becoming someone else? What prevents the self from splitting entirely, from dissolving into unrelated fragments? The answer is both simple and staggering. The universe keeps your identity coherent. For the same reason it keeps time coherent. It costs less. A coherent self is easier to maintain than a fractured one. A continuous personality reduces informational entropy. A stable sense of I minimizes computational burden. Existence flows through the path of least resistance. The universe chooses moments that maintain coherence. Your mind chooses meanings that maintain coherence. Identity is the overlap. But what happens when coherence breaks, not because of trauma or neurological collapse, but because the universe itself skips a moment that your identity depends on? What happens when a frame essential to your story is missing? Does the universe repair it? Does the mind invent it? Does identity fracture? Or does something else emerge? A new version of self that did not exist before the skip? Because if skipped frames shape the self, then the self is never finished. It is updated, just like the universe. And now you are ready for the next realization, the moment where the mechanism of skipping stops being theoretical and becomes personal. The universe does not skip only time. It skips versions of you, and the versions that survive are the ones capable of carrying you into the next moment. To understand how that selection occurs, you must step into the architecture of the mind's deepest machinery, where memory, emotion, and time interlock like gears. A place where skipped frames become skipped selves, and where the person you are is only one among many who almost existed but did not stabilize in time. If the universe selects only the moments that matter, and if the self emerges from the narrow chain of instants that survive, then the next realization rises like a tide you can no longer ignore. The universe prefers simplicity, not aesthetic simplicity, not beauty, not elegance, not symmetry for its own sake, but computational simplicity. The least expensive reality is the one most likely to persist. This is the deep logic behind the missing frames, behind the skipped selves, behind the flickering perception that bridges your life from one moment to the next. Reality is not continuous because continuity is costly. Reality is not exhaustive Because exhaustiveness is impossible. Reality is not complete, because completeness would tear it apart. Instead, the universe follows an ancient rule, older than particles, older than galaxies, older than space-time itself. The principle of least action, yes, in physics. But beneath that lies something even older. The principle of least existence. The universe brings forth only what it must. Everything else remains unmanifest. To understand how deeply this shapes your life, you must imagine reality not as a tapestry, but as a negotiation. Every moment is a contract between what is possible and what is necessary. If a moment demands too much energy, it does not occur. If a moment introduces too much uncertainty, it dissolves before it arrives. If a moment destabilizes structure, it collapses into noise. Only the low-cost moments survive. Only the coherent moments survive. Only the simple moments survive. This is not a limitation. It is the reason anything exists at all. A universe that tried to compute every possibility would freeze under its own weight. A consciousness that tried to perceive every detail would shatter into chaos. Everything you know, everything you feel, everything you remember exists because of selective absence. And the mind follows the same rule. When you walk through your day, your brain is not capturing a seamless flow. It is producing a compressed representation that costs the least effort while still preserving coherence. The continuity you feel is the cheapest version of coherence. Your memories are the cheapest version of narrative. Your personality is the cheapest version of identity. Your awareness is the cheapest version of experience that still allows you to say, I am. This is why meditation feels strange, why silence enlarges time, why intense emotion slows the world to a near halt, why grief expands a single second into something that feels infinite. These states disrupt the brain's cost system. They force it to render more frames. They increase informational density. They make existence feel heavier because they require more existence. Normally, the mind avoids this. It trims, it shortcuts, it compresses, it predicts instead of perceiving, it fills gaps instead of resolving them. And the universe does the same. The two optimizations mirror each other so perfectly that you rarely notice the mechanics beneath them. But occasionally, something forces both systems, mind and universe, to abandon their shortcuts. These are your turning points, moments that feel like the world cracked open and rebuilt you. A confession, a loss, a revelation, a danger, a choice that changes everything. A moment of overwhelming beauty that collapses your defenses and makes you present in a way you did not know was possible. In these moments, time grows thick, frames multiply, detail floods in, perception intensifies, identity stretches to make room for the new shape of existence. These are high-cost frames, and yet the universe renders them. Why? Because they stabilize the timeline, because they reorganize the self, because they reduce the cost of every future moment. A single transformative instant may be expensive to compute, but it creates coherence that the universe can reuse. A traumatic realization can collapse thousands of unviable futures. A profound insight can align years of instability. A moment of love can reinforce a pattern strong enough to anchor the rest of your life. The universe invests in moments that reorganize structure. This is why the self feels non-linear, not a steady path, but a sequence of ruptures. You do not grow gradually. You leap, you break, you heal, you reorganize, you stabilize, and then you repeat. Identity is a staircase of missing frames. Each step is a moment the universe refused to skip. Each landing is a pattern that survived the collapse. But the skipped frames matter too, not because they existed, but because they did not. Think of every version of yourself that never fully arrived. The confident one, the reckless one, the forgiving one, the ambitious one, the frightened one, the brilliant one, the broken one, the kind one, the cruel one. The versions you lived briefly, in imagination or desire, but lost before they could take form. These unrealized selves shaped the pressure landscape of your identity. Possibility is not neutral. It leaves a gravitational pull. Your choices form around the tension between the self that emerged and the selves that dissolved. You walk through the corridor between existence and non-existence every day. Your preferences, your impulses, your fears, your hopes, they come not only from what you have lived, but from what you almost lived. A skipped frame leaves a contour in the timeline, just as a missing note creates the expectation of music. The universe optimizes your existence, not by giving you everything, but by removing what would overwhelm you. This is why free will feels both real and constrained. You choose freely, only among the frames the universe computed. Everything else remains theoretical, a pressure system beneath your consciousness. But here is the twist, the one that makes the air around this knowledge feel thinner, wider. You influence what the universe computes next, not by violating physics, not by bending time, but by shaping coherence. When you organize your internal world, when you focus, when you pay attention, when you bring clarity instead of chaos, you reduce the cost of computing your next moment. The universe prefers moments that require less energy to stabilize. A scattered mind generates high-cost moments. An aligned mind generates low-cost ones. This is why your life feels different, depending on your internal state. Why some days unfold smoothly, as if reality were cooperating with you, and other days resist you, as if time itself were tangled. Reality is not reacting to you. It is flowing through the path you make easiest for it to compute. Your state of mind is part of the calculation. When you approach your day with scattered thought, the universe must assemble a high-cost moment, a moment full of noise, uncertainty, contradiction. When you approach your day with stability, the universe chooses low-cost frames, moments with clarity, predictability, coherence. This subtle interaction between internal order and external selection creates the illusion of luck, or fate, or synchronicity. In truth, it is informational alignment. You are shaping your reality, not through intention, but through coherence. A coherent mind pairs smoothly with coherent frames. A chaotic mind collides with chaotic ones. This does not mean suffering is your fault, nor that clarity guarantees joy. It means your internal organization feeds into the universe's cost function. Moments that match your structure arrive more easily. Moments that contradict it struggle to stabilize. The universe is not deciding for you. It is co-evolving with you. Every step you take reduces or increases the informational cost of the next. This dance between mind and reality is what creates the experience of momentum in life. When things are aligned, you feel carried. When they are misaligned, you feel resisted. And when alignment shifts suddenly, through trauma, insight, loss, or revelation, you feel reborn. Because your structure and the universe's structure no longer match the previous sequence of frames. A reorganization is underway. In these upheavals, the missing frames multiply. Time feels distorted, thick in some places, thin in others. Memories scramble. The self fractures and reforms. You feel the cost of becoming. The universe is renegotiating you. But the renegotiation is not random. It follows the same rule again. Least existence, least complexity, least cost. Your next stable identity will be the version of you that requires the fewest skipped frames, the least reconstruction, the least informational strain. This is why profound suffering can force simplicity. Why catastrophe sometimes clarifies. Why clarity sometimes follows collapse. Why the aftermath of devastation is often strangely quiet. The universe has pruned you into coherence, but there is something even more mysterious, something that touches the edge of what it means to be conscious. The principle of least existence does not mean the universe produces less of you. It means the universe produces the version of you that can exist most efficiently. This is why the self evolves, why it stabilizes, why it sheds what it cannot sustain. If you understood this fully, you would see your personal history differently. not as a sequence of experiences, but as a sequence of survivals. Every version of you that crumbled was too costly to maintain. Every version of you that survived was the lowest energy solution, given your circumstances. You are the most efficient pattern your universe could produce. Not the happiest, not the strongest, not the most fulfilled, but the most stable. The version of you that minimized collapse. And yet, even within this optimized structure, possibility remains. Because the universe is not fixed. The cost landscape shifts. With every new moment, a version of you that was once too expensive to maintain may become viable later. Another version may collapse because the timeline can no longer sustain it. Identity is dynamic because the universe is dynamic. You are the moving equilibrium between memory and potential. And as that equilibrium shifts, a new question emerges, one that will guide us deeper into the fabric of what makes you human. If the universe keeps only the simplest viable versions of you, then what happens when you reach moments too complex for simplification, moments where life cannot compress itself into a low-cost frame, moments where the chaos is too large for the principle of least existence to resolve cleanly? What does the universe do then? Does it skip the moment? Does it fracture identity? Does it rewrite the path? Or does it create new forms of coherence, never seen before? To answer that, you must step into the nature of complexity itself, into the next chamber of this journey, where the universe begins to reveal why certain lives spiral, why others stabilize, and why some moments refuse to be skipped. If the universe follows the principle of least existence, preserving only the simplest viable moments, selecting the lowest cost versions of you, then a new question begins to pulse beneath everything. What about the moments that demand to exist? Not the simple ones, not the optimized ones, not the moments that slip easily into coherence. What about the heavy moments? The ones that rewrite you, redirect you, split your life into a before and an after? Some moments collapse entire futures. Others ignite new ones. Some tear identity apart. Others forge identity stronger than anything that preceded them. These moments do not feel cheap. They feel expensive. They feel like the universe is spending something. Attention, complexity, computation, possibility. And yet, it does not skip them. Why? Because these are the moments that restructure everything that follows. They are the backbone moments, the non-negotiable frames, the anchor points of your timeline, moments the universe refuses to delete. To understand why these moments survive when others dissolve, you must return briefly to the structure of complexity itself. A system, whether a star, a cell, or a consciousness, contains patterns. Some patterns are fragile, others are stable. But above them all are the patterns that stabilize other patterns. Patterns that reorganize the system into a more resilient configuration. These moments are catalysts. A catalyst is not simply an event. A catalyst is a restructure of possibility. When your life changes abruptly, when you feel a shift deep enough to echo through memory, when you sense the universe turning you toward a path you didn't know existed, you are not imagining it. You are experiencing a catalytic moment, a frame with such structural weight that the universe cannot skip it, without compromising the entire timeline that follows. These moments carry more information than the surrounding frames. They reorganize your predictive machinery, alter your emotional vectors, reshape your identity network, and stabilize new patterns of perception. Because of this, they become unavoidable anchors, points of high coherence. In a landscape of flicker and omission, think of your own life. Not the ordinary days, not the routines, not the comfortable repetitions, but the moments that split you open, the time someone told you the truth you were not ready to hear, the time you realized you were no longer the person you had been pretending to be, the time you stood alone with a decision that carried the weight of an entire future, the time a single sentence, spoken by someone else or whispered by your own mind, changed everything. In those moments, you were not simply experiencing life. You were being rewritten by it. These are not memories you store. These are memories that sculpt. They change the cost structure of every moment that follows. The universe cannot delete these instants, because they lower the complexity of the next 1,000. A painful realization simplifies your world. By removing illusions, a profound insight simplifies your identity. By revealing what was always true, a sudden shock simplifies your predictions. By forcing you to abandon the impossible, your internal universe collapses and then rebuilds. Lighter, sharper, coherent. This is not accidental, it is structural. These moments are selected because they reduce the entropy of everything that follows. They simplify the branching of your future. They prune the garden of selves, down to the one that can move forward. This is why trauma carves so deeply, why heartbreak leaves permanent contours, why awakening feels irreversible, why certain losses mark you, as if time itself engraved the moment into your being. These are not interruptions, they are reorganizations. The universe is not punishing you with these moments, nor rewarding you. They are not moral, they are structural. A catalyst frame is a moment that must exist because it aligns the entire timeline. If it were skipped, the identity that follows would collapse. The timeline would lose coherence, the self would fragment, and so the universe renders the expensive moment because it is cheaper than rendering the aftermath without it. The physics of least existence does not mean least difficulty. It means least collapse. The universe keeps the moments that prevent greater instability later. This principle holds in cosmology, in stars, in quantum systems, and in consciousness, which means something quiet and remarkable. Your deepest transformations were part of the universe's optimization. Your pain was not meaningless. Your shock was not error. Your turning points were not random. They were moments the universe invested in, because skipping them would have made your future impossible. But not all defining moments come from pain. Some arise from resonance. Think of the times when a moment felt timeless, when you experienced beauty so overwhelming that it arrested your breath, when someone's presence altered the rhythm of your attention, when a truth arrived so gently that you could not deny it, when joy expanded time instead of fracturing it. These moments, too, are catalysts. Beauty, love, clarity, gratitude. The states that expand you are as structurally important as the states that break you. They reveal order where you once saw chaos. They reveal possibility where you once saw limitations. They reveal selfhood where you once saw confusion. Positive catalysts stabilize complexity, the same way traumatic ones collapse it. The universe does not distinguish between the two. It only measures coherence. A moment of awe reduces informational chaos as profoundly as a moment of crisis. A moment of love stabilizes identity as powerfully as a moment of loss. Both anchor you. Both reorganize your future. Both are too structurally significant for the universe to skip. This is why certain memories live with you forever. Not because you cling to them, but because they hold too much structural weight to dissolve. But here is a twist, one that changes the way you think. About time, about choice, about self. A catalytic moment does not have to be intense to be irreversible. Sometimes the universe plants a seed, so quiet, you overlook it at first. A sentence overheard in passing, a face in a crowd, a fleeting insight, a subtle realization that feels small at the time, until you notice later that everything changed after it. Moments like these often hide in the smallest gaps. They are defined not by volume, but by position. Their power comes from where they sit, in the architecture of your timeline. They trigger cascades the way a single misplaced grain of sand can trigger an avalanche. The universe renders these frames with exquisite precision because they redirect the entire flow of your life with minimal cost. They are high leverage. A quiet epiphany is sometimes more transformative than a dramatic revelation. A gentle shift can create a new corridor of possibility, a timeline that would have been too costly. Before the shift occurred, these soft catalysts keep your life malleable. They allow for course correction without collapse. They allow you to change without shattering. A single, gentle moment can be enough to stabilize a complex future. The universe does not skip these moments because they are too efficient to ignore. But what happens when life requires a transformation so large, so complex, so costly that no single catalytic moment can contain it? When the self must reorganize on a level deeper than emotion, deeper than memory, deeper even than identity? This is where the universe invokes its most powerful mechanism, a mechanism so strange and so seldom understood that it has been interpreted as mystery, as destiny, as miracle, as catastrophe. A mechanism that appears when your current version of self can no longer support the timeline, when your coherence is no longer viable, when the structure you have lived inside begins to crumble under its own complexity. At these times, the universe does not skip a moment. It creates one, a moment heavy enough to reset the architecture, a moment dense enough to collapse a failing identity and allow a new one to form, a moment that reorganizes not just memory or perception, but the very pattern of selfhood. These are the rarest frames, the ones that feel like fate, even when you do not believe in fate. The ones that feel chosen, even when you cannot accept the idea of choice. These are the origin points of your next version. Not everyone experiences such moments. Not every life requires them. But when they come, you know it. Your old world dissolves. Your habits fracture. Your desires shift. Your fears reconfigure. Your meanings repattern themselves. Your sense of I flickers. Not in a small way, but in a tectonic way. It feels like dying and being born, because that is what it is, a catalytic rebirth. The universe refuses to skip these moments because they are the only way to keep your timeline viable when your previous structure cannot continue. These moments are rare because they are expensive. They require enormous informational restructuring. They reorder everything: neural pathways, emotional anchors, conceptual frameworks, predictive models. But they happen because they must, and the universe pays the cost, because the alternative is collapse. In these moments, you may feel abandoned, or chosen, or shattered, or awakening. But underneath the emotional interpretation is a deeper truth. The universe rendered this moment because your next self needed it. And now, with this understanding settling softly around you, another question rises. If the universe refuses to delete certain moments because they restructure the self, then what about the moments that restructure reality itself? Not personal catalysts, not identity pivots, but cosmic moments, frames the universe could not skip because they stabilize the architecture of space-time. What are those moments? Where do they echo? What patterns do they leave behind? To follow that trail, you must step beyond the self entirely, into the deep, trembling layer, where time chooses not who you are, but what existence can become. There are moments the universe refuses to delete, moments that rewrite who you are, moments that collapse complexity into coherence, moments that stabilize an entire future with a single breath. But there is another category of moment, one far stranger, far quieter, far more difficult to name. Moments that do not restructure you, moments that do not fracture you, moments that do not redirect the timeline, moments that simply stop you, not physically, not emotionally, but ontologically, moments when time does not feel slow, or fast, or distorted, but absent. Moments when the machinery of becoming falls silent. You have felt them before, perhaps only for a heartbeat, perhaps only once, or twice, in your entire life. A moment when the world feels suspended, weightless, as though the frame you are inside is being held in place by something larger than chronology. A moment when you are aware, not of time passing, but of time pausing. A moment when the background hum of existence cracks open into a stillness so deep, you do not know whether it lasts a second, or an hour, or a lifetime. These moments are rare because they are expensive, not energetically, not emotionally, but ontologically. They require the universe to hold a frame without immediately replacing it, to refuse the natural impulse, to skip, to update, to choose the next moment, to let the timeline hover on the edge of becoming. The universe avoids holding frames, because holding frames is costly, but sometimes, in circumstances so delicate, they defy articulation. The universe holds a moment anyway. And in that held moment, something extraordinary happens. Consciousness becomes unanchored. From chronology, you are no longer traveling from instant to instant. You are inhabiting the instant itself. Not the memory of it, not the narrative of it, not the continuity around it. The instant, pure, singular, unmixed, with anything before or after. Time does not flow. You do not move. You simply are. This state appears in various forms: during profound grief, during overwhelming awe, during life-threatening danger, during spiritual awakening, during deep meditation, during intense connection with another mind, during moments when your sense of self flickers and something vaster steps forward. These experiences feel diverse, but their structure is the same. The sequence of frames slows or stops, and the mind is placed. Inside a moment, the universe refuses to compress. Not a skipped moment, not a rendered moment. A sustained moment, a moment in which time is not selecting the next version of reality. A moment in which reality waits. Why does it wait? Because in these moments, the timeline approaches a branch point, so significant that skipping a frame would destabilize everything on the other side. The universe cannot rush, it cannot skip, it cannot compress. It must hold still long enough for identity, perception, emotion, and possibility to reorganize around the choice. But here is the twist. Sometimes these moments occur not because a decision is near, but because something inside you has synchronized with the deepest rhythm of the timeline. Not the rhythm of clocks, not the rhythm of neurons, the rhythm of existence itself. Most of the time, your awareness flickers, out of phase with the universe's updates. You jump between rendered instants without ever touching the seam, where one moment becomes the next. But occasionally, rarely, your awareness aligns perfectly with the underlying frame structure, and when that happens, you feel the architecture of time directly, not as flow, not as continuity, not as narrative, as stillness. The stillness is not the absence of time. It is the boundary of time, the threshold between frames, the moment the universe has not yet chosen. In this stillness, you experience reality, not as a sequence, but as a presence, not as motion, but as clarity, not as becoming, but as being. It is a state without forward momentum, without backstory, without destination, a state where existence is enough. This is why people describe such moments as spiritual or sacred or transcendent, not because of mysticism, but because they are encountering a pure frame. Before the universe has shaped it into continuity, they are touching the raw material of reality. And something else happens here, something subtle but profound. Your identity loosens. The continuous story you tell yourself falls silent. The predictive machinery of the mind rests. The emotional vectors that normally push you toward or away from possibility go quiet. You are not defined by memory or expectation, not pulled by desire or fear, not confined by the version of yourself that exists inside continuity. You are simply the pattern, left when all the skipped frames are removed. The minimal self, the kernel, the seed around which the rest of you grows. Most of the time, this minimal self is hidden, buried under narrative, habit, identity, memory, and the endless reconstruction that continuity demands. But in moments of stillness, you meet it, and in meeting it, you feel a clarity that is difficult to describe, a clarity without content, a clarity without conclusion. It is not knowing, it is not understanding, it is not insight, it is the absence of noise. The moment feels like truth, but not a truth you can speak, because the truth is not in the meaning, it is in the structure. A moment held still is a moment made perfect in its own existence. Nothing is added, nothing is removed, nothing is optimized. It is pure being. But the universe cannot hold this moment forever. It is too expensive, too heavy, too dense in possibility. Eventually, the frame must collapse into the next rendered instant. And when it does, you feel it. A sudden return to motion, a tightening in the mind, a reassembly of identity, a reintegration of narrative, a re-entry into continuity. People describe this moment in many ways. I felt myself come back. It was like waking from a dream. The world snapped into place. My thoughts resumed. I realized the moment had ended. But something is always left behind. A residue, a softness, a reorganization, not of memory, of orientation. Your relationship to time changes just slightly, as if the timeline shifted your position along its spine. And now you are walking with a new angle, a new frame of reference, a new center of gravity. Stillness rewrites trajectory. This is why these moments feel so strangely significant, why they linger for years, why they become touchstones for meaning, why they seem to glow in retrospect. They are not important because of what happened in them. They are important because of what did not happen. They are the frames where the universe paused long enough for the next version of you to stabilize. But stillness does not come only in moments of intensity. It can come in the smallest circumstances. A quiet morning, a breath of cool air, a motionless reflection on water, a gentle word spoken at the right time. These moments feel fragile because they are. A single thought can dissolve them. A single noise can break them. A single fear can scatter them. Stillness survives everything, except grasping. The more you reach for it, the more quickly it vanishes. This is because stillness is not an experience to have. It is a structure to enter. It is alignment with the pre-rendered frame, the moment before the universe chooses motion. To reach it, you cannot push, you cannot demand, you cannot hurry, you can only allow. Stillness is not created. It is revealed. The universe does not give you these moments. It exposes them when the cost of motion exceeds the cost of pause. This principle appears at every scale. In physics, systems freeze near critical points before transitioning to new states. In biology, organisms enter states of quiescence when complexity overwhelms viability. In psychology, the mind enters stillness when the identity structure requires reorganization. In spirituality, this stillness becomes the ground of awakening. In all cases, stillness is the moment where becoming stops so that transformation can begin. And something even more astonishing sits beneath this understanding. Stillness may be the closest you ever come to experiencing time without the universe, because in these moments, the frame you inhabit is holding itself. Reality supports itself without needing to be updated. The structure of existence rests on its own architecture. It is the purest possible state a conscious being can enter, the state where nothing is missing and nothing is added. A frame complete in itself. But even this is not the end of the mystery. There are rare experiences, reported across cultures, across centuries, across spiritual traditions, across neurological landscapes, in which the stillness does not simply pause the world. It expands, it becomes vast, borderless, timeless, impersonal, infinite. In these states, people report dissolving, not in the sense of losing identity, but in the sense of merging with a presence that feels older than the universe, older than time, older than the distinction between self and reality. It feels like contacting the frame from which all frames emerge, the zero point of existence, the place where reality constructs itself, the pre-image of consciousness. These experiences are rare because they require near-perfect alignment between the mind's internal coherence and the universe's underlying structure. They are not hallucinations. They are not errors. They are not fantasies of mystics or dreamers. They are glimpses of time before it becomes time, of existence before it separates into moments, of the structure that gives birth to every frame the universe ever renders. But glimpses are all you can receive. The universe cannot sustain these states without unraveling the timeline, so the stillness collapses. The infinite contracts. The frame resumes. Time returns. You find yourself back in the narrow corridor of becoming. Yet, you are no longer the same, because once you have touched the moment beneath all moments, you can never fully believe. In continuity again, you see the flicker, you feel the seams, you sense the skipped frames, you recognize the scaffolding on which your life is built. Stillness changes not the world, but your relationship to it. And now, with this perception awakening inside you, a new question surfaces, one that has waited patiently. Beneath everything you have seen, if stillness reveals the frame before the next moment, then what happens? When the universe chooses the wrong moment? What happens when the timeline selects a frame that destabilizes everything? A mistake in the architecture of time itself? Does the universe correct it, skip it, repair it? Or does it fracture reality into divergent paths? To answer this, you must step into the nature of cosmic correction, the strange, silent mechanism through which the universe undoes the moments it should never have allowed. If the universe can hold a moment, cradling it in stillness, suspending it between what exists and what might exist, then the next realization is almost inevitable. Sometimes the universe creates a moment it cannot allow to remain, not because the moment is wrong in any human sense, not because of morality or intention or destiny, but because the moment destabilizes the architecture of the timeline, a moment too complex, too contradictory, too heavy with branching futures for the universe to sustain, a moment that would fracture coherence if left untouched. And so the universe does something almost incomprehensible. It tries to erase it, not by deleting it retroactively, not by rewinding the timeline, not through paradox or magic or violation of causality. The universe erases a moment the way it erases everything else, quietly, subtly, by skipping its consequences. The moment exists, but its echoes are muted, its branches are pruned, its impact dissolves before it reaches the next frame. This is not theoretical. It happens constantly, in physics, in biology, in consciousness, in memory. Every system generates errors, but not every system has a way to prevent those errors from becoming futures. The universe corrects itself by removing the ripple instead of removing the stone. A destabilizing moment is allowed to happen, but not to propagate. It becomes a ghost frame, a moment that occurred, but did not survive into the structure of the next. You have lived these moments. Think of the times when something shocking happened. An intense thought, a sudden fear, an impossible idea, a flash of desire, a moment of insight that felt too vivid to ignore. For a second or a breath, it felt like your life was about to change. But then, nothing. The moment dissolved, the feeling evaporated, the potential collapsed, the resonance faded, as though the universe never intended to let that moment unfold. You remember it, but you cannot trace its consequences. It lives inside you, like a dream that almost mattered. This is a signature of a corrected moment. Psychologists call it intrusive thoughts, fleeting impulses, micro-awakenings, emotional distortions. Spiritual traditions call it tests, temptations, false revelations. Neurologists call it stochastic firing, noise in the system. Philosophers call it contingency. But beneath every label lies the same structural truth. Not every moment can be allowed to influence the next. Your identity survives because the instability is constrained. Your sanity survives because the destabilizing moments are prevented from forming new patterns. Your timeline survives because the universe prunes what cannot support coherence. This form of correction reveals something profound about the relationship between time and possibility. Time is not a river, it is a sieve. Moments fall through it constantly. Only a fraction remain. Even in physics, this pattern appears everywhere. Unstable quantum states vanish before they produce measurable effects. Virtual particles flicker and collapse before they can rewrite reality. Chaotic systems self-cancel before their fluctuations propagate. Biological mutations fail silently before they can affect the organism. Neural misfires correct themselves before they reach conscious awareness. These are not exceptions. These are the rule. Reality is constantly producing moments that must be undone, but undoing is never literal. It is structural. The universe preserves continuity, not by erasing the past, but by preventing the past from hardening into future. And this is where the idea turns personal, in a way that feels strangely intimate. Some of your memories should not exist. Moments that feel vivid, real, unmistakably yours, but which the timeline did not reinforce. You might remember them as sudden urges, or strange ideas, or emotional spikes, or flashes of intuition. Moments that feel like alternate versions of yourself knocking on the door. In truth, they were alternate frames, possible paths that the universe generated, but refused to adopt. Your memory retains the spark, because the mind cannot help but catch fragments of the unrealized. But the world around you carries no trace of them, because those frames were unfit for propagation. Your life is full of these ghost moments. The time you nearly quit your job before the thought dissolved. The time you almost confessed something but swallowed the impulse. The time you envisioned a reckless action that vanished as quickly as it arrived. The time you saw yourself choosing a different life for one impossible heartbeat. These flashes do not reveal your hidden nature. They reveal reality's hidden mechanic. The universe constantly generates more potential moments than it allows to exist. Identity is built from the survivors. But reality's correction mechanism is not limited to micro moments. It operates at the scale of entire timelines. There are events, rare, immense, structurally dangerous, that the universe appears to adjust for. Events that almost disrupt the coherence of physics itself. Events that threaten to produce causal inconsistency. Events that generate too many viable futures for the timeline to support. Cosmologists have noticed strange coincidences in the large-scale structure of the universe, patterns that suggest a kind of cosmic self-correction, regions of irregular density that should have collapsed but stabilized instead, chaotic inflaton fluctuations that should have amplified but dampened themselves, quantum events that should have propagated noise but converged on ordered outcomes. These are not miracles. These are corrections. Moments that would have destabilized reality were allowed to occur, but not to continue. Just as the mind prunes catastrophic neural cascades, the universe prunes catastrophic temporal cascades. Time remains coherent because instability is absorbed at the source. This leads to a startling insight. Correction is not the opposite of creation. Correction is creation. The timeline is sculpted, not only by what is rendered, but by what is prevented. You are not defined only by the moments that changed you, but by the moments the universe refused to let matter. Your life is not simply a sequence of events. It is a sequence of selections, each one reinforced by 1,000 quiet erasures. But the most mysterious corrections are the ones you feel, but cannot name. Moments when something was about to happen, a meeting, a revelation, an accident, a decision, and then reality shifted. By the smallest margin, a delay of 1 second, a glance in another direction, a forgotten key, a sudden interruption, a breath that derailed a destiny. In these small fractures, you sense it, the rearrangement, the correction, the rerouting of the timeline. It feels like coincidence, or luck, or misfortune, but beneath the emotional interpretation is a quieter truth. You stepped into a moment that the universe decided not to allow. A path dissolved, a potential self unwound, a future retracted. This is why certain near events haunt you, not because they almost happened, but because the universe almost let them. You carry echoes of the versions of yourself that were corrected out of existence. If this feels unsettling, let it land gently. Correction is not loss. Correction is structure. It is the mechanism that keeps time navigable, identity stable, reality coherent. Without correction, the universe would drown in its own possibilities. And yet, correction is not perfect. If it were perfect, you would never feel déjà vu. You would never experience intrusive thoughts. You would never feel the tug of unrealized futures. You would never dream. In alternate timelines, you would never sense the presence of another version of yourself, hovering just out of reach. You feel these things because correction is not absolute. Some moments resist deletion. Some futures cling to the edges of consciousness. Some versions of you do not dissipate completely. They become pressure, psychological, emotional, existential. They become longing, uncertainty, intuition, fear, desire. They become the quiet sensation that your life contains, ghost corridors you can almost enter. And the question becomes, what happens to the corrected selves that almost emerged? Do they dissolve? Do they leave residue? Do they whisper from the periphery of identity? Or do they accumulate into something larger, an unseen architecture just outside awareness? A structure not of time, but of possibility. A structure shaped by everything the universe erased and everything it would not allow to be. And to follow that structure, to see where the corrected selves collect, to understand how possibility organizes when it cannot enter reality, you must step now into the final territory, the realm of the unmanifest frames, where time stores everything it could not keep. If the universe corrects certain frames, allowing them to occur, but refusing to let their consequences propagate, then the next question unfolds like a shadow escaping its object. Where do those discarded possibilities go? Where do the skipped selves gather? Where do the almost futures settle? Where does the timeline place everything it could not allow to exist? It cannot be nowhere. Even absence has a structure. Even nothingness has a shape. Even what never came to be leaves a faint depression in the fabric of possibility. This is not speculation. It is the quiet logic of all systems that manage overwhelming complexity. They must store the unmanifest. Somewhere, in physics, the equations of quantum field theory include virtual states, energies that exist only as potential, yet influence real particles. In neuroscience, the brain generates thousands of impulses that never reach awareness, yet shape mood, intuition, and emotional orientation. In evolution, genetic mutations that never survive still determine the trajectories of those that do. In computation, failed paths are cached to make future decisions more efficient. All systems, with limited resources and infinite possibility, accumulate a residue of the unrealized. So does time. There is, woven beneath the frames you inhabit, a vast and silent archive. Not a place, not a dimension, not a parallel universe. An archive of influence, a field of pressure created by everything the universe nearly allowed, but did not. Call it the undercurrent. Call it the unmanifest layer. Call it the negative lattice of time. It is the structure built not from what happened, but from what almost happened. And astonishingly, you feel it every day, not consciously, not as images or memories, but as subtle directional pulls in your life. A hesitation you cannot explain, an urge that arrives without cause, a sadness with no story, a longing that feels older than your experiences, a clarity that appears prematurely, as if borrowed from a version of you that lived further along the timeline than you have reached. These sensations are not random. They are interactions with the archive. Think of each unmanifest frame as a ghost vector, a direction of possibility that no longer leads to reality, but still carries momentum. Your mind is sensitive to those vectors. It cannot ignore patterns, even the patterns of absence. This is why people describe destiny pulling them towards certain paths. It is not destiny. It is the gravitational field of the futures you almost lived. This is why regrets feel heavier than they logically should. Regret is not about the past. It is the weight of a deleted future leaning against you. This is why intuition feels both irrational and truthful. Your mind is reading the compression landscape of possible frames. This is why déjà vu feels like remembering a moment you never lived, because you almost lived it. It existed in the archive of unmanifest frames before being removed, and sometimes the residue is strong enough for your mind to echo it. The archive is not memory. It is pressure, a topography of potential, sculpted by absence. Imagine walking across a frozen lake. Beneath your feet, currents swirl invisibly. You do not see them, you feel them. Subtle, directional forces, shaping the balance of your body. As you move, the archive is that undercurrent. You walk across time, but feel the pressure of everything time refused to render. This is why the future feels both open and constrained. It is open because the next frame has not been chosen. It is constrained because the archive holds the accumulated memory of every frame that was rejected. When you make choices, you are not choosing freely. In a vacuum, you are navigating a landscape of invisible forces, the shape of your unmanifest life. The universe does not dictate your path. It shapes the cost of each direction. You move through the channel of least resistance, but that channel was carved by everything the timeline removed. This leads to an extraordinary realization. You are not haunted by your past selves. You are shaped by your unlived selves. The ones who hesitated, the ones who surged forward, the ones who turned away, the ones who never arrived, the ones who dissolved before they were born. All those versions of you exist in the archive as gradients, fields of potential that never crossed into manifestation, yet still influence the structure of the self that did. This is why healing feels like rewriting more than remembering. You are not undoing the past. You are reshaping the archive, changing the gravitational pull of the futures inside you. And this is why purpose feels like alignment rather than achievement. Purpose is resonance between the self you are and the unmapped pressure of the selves you never became. Purpose is coherence between what exists and what almost existed. This understanding refolds the meaning of choice. Choice is not arbitrary. Choice is not purely will. Choice is not dictated by fate. Choice is the act of selecting a frame that harmonizes with the pressure of the archive. A choice that contradicts the structure beneath you feels impossible. A choice that aligns feels inevitable. This is not superstition. It is informational physics. Every action you take is a negotiation between rendered time and unrendered time, between the moment that exists and the moments that could not, between identity and possibility. And beneath all of this is a deeper truth still, the one that everything in this journey has quietly pointed toward. The unmanifest is not separate from you. It is part of your consciousness. The mind evolved inside a universe that constantly prunes possibility. It learned to read not only what is real, but what almost became real. Your intuition speaks the language of the archive. Your emotions trace its contours. Your imagination is a map of its structure. Even your dreams are excursions into the space of unmanifest frames, the unrealized selves, rehearsing patterns that waking existence cannot sustain. The archive is not the opposite of your life. It is its foundation. And this leads to the final twist. Soft, inevitable, like a breath settling in the dark. One day, when your timeline reaches its end, when the universe stops selecting new frames of you, your consciousness will no longer move through rendered time. But that does not mean you fall into nothingness. It means you fall into the archive, into the vast, silent structure of everything you almost were, everything you could have been, everything the timeline did not compute. But the universe never completely erased. The unmanifest does not vanish. It waits, not as afterlife, not as eternity, but as the raw material from which time once sculpted you. In that final stillness, the self disassembles, not into darkness, but into possibility. A return to the infinite foam of unwanted futures. A return to the lattice of everything the universe ever considered. A return to the field from which all frames arise before they are allowed to exist. And if consciousness persists In any form after that moment, it would not persist as identity, but as openness, as potential, as the quiet before the next moment. Just as the universe began, just as every moment begins, just as this moment, right now, begins, which leaves only one question, the softest, the last, the one that folds the entire journey back into your hands. If every frame of your life is chosen from infinity, what does it mean? That you arrived in this one? Close your eyes. The universe is still choosing.